Billionaire CEO entered the wrong room on a cruise ship and was shocked by what he saw. But before we dive into the full story, let me know where you're watching from and what time it is. Now, subscribe to the channel, and let's get started. The ocean shimmered under the blazing sun as one of the world's most exclusive business cruises prepared to leave port. On board were executives and magnates from every corner of the globe, all seeking new opportunities or alliances. Among them was Anton Reyes, a millionaire CEO famed for catapulting struggling companies into the realm of success overnight. Tall, with eyes that betrayed a relentless ambition, Anton exuded confidence even while checking his phone for the 100th time that morning. He had boarded this luxury liner not just for the usual networking events but also to host a series of closed-door meetings with other influential guests. If all went according to plan, he would announce a new venture by the cruise's final day, something that could reshape his entire industry. Anton thrived on deadlines, on the adrenaline that came from last-minute deals sealed over a handshake and a glass of champagne. Everyone on that vessel knew him by name or by reputation. He was the unstoppable force who turned boardrooms into personal stages, unafraid to gamble millions and come out bronnious. But behind the impeccable suit and the calculating gaze, there was a whisper of restlessness, a hidden tension that not even his most loyal advisors perceived. He couldn't quite place it, but stepping onto that cruise felt different, like a faint tug at the edges of his consciousness, warning him that something was about to happen. Something big. He brushed off the feeling and tightened the knot of his expensive tie. He had grown used to ignoring such instincts, believing only in the numbers and the unstoppable momentum of a successful man. Inside his private suite number 504 on the Emerald deck, he placed his laptop on a polished desk. This floating palace had everything he might need: high-speed internet, a panoramic window overlooking the sea, plush chairs that cradled you like a promise of success. Yet Anton was restless, pacing. He checked his watch. Time for the first in a series of crucial calls. Before connecting, he decided he needed fresh air. A short walk around the corridors would help clear the noise in his head. The cruise's interior corridors smelled of polished wood and floral arrangements, each hallway meticulously labeled. It should have been impossible to get lost, but Anton's mind was somewhere else as he walked. He thought about the upcoming meeting, about the unsent messages piling up on his phone, about an old promise he had made many years ago, something he'd tried to bury under layers of triumphant press releases and carefully orchestrated success stories. He took a wrong turn. The corridor ended in a quieter wing, far from the main lobby, and an open door at the end of the hallway caught his attention. He glanced at the cabin number, 510, close to his own, but not quite. Normally, privacy was a top priority for every passenger, yet the door was slightly ajar, golden light spilling onto the hallway carpeting. He frowned. It wasn't like any staff area. It was clearly someone's personal cabin. A subtle sense of courtesy told him to just move on, but the door's half-open invitation was strangely compelling. Perhaps a cleaning crew had left it that way, or a confused passenger. He paused, telling himself he'd simply alert a steward. But then he heard it, laughter and the chatter of children. That surprised him. This was a high-end business cruise, not a family holiday known for hosting large groups of kids. He pushed the door gently, clearing his throat. "Hello? Is everything all right?" he asked in a low, polite tone, expecting a hasty apology from someone who had mixed up the cabins. The moment Anton took a step inside, his eyes landed on two small boys around 7 years old, with dark hair and an uncanny resemblance to him. He nearly forgot to breathe. Each held a small stuffed toy shaped like an anchor. Their eyes, bright and curious, locked on his face with a flicker of recognition, as though they too felt a strange familiarity. Before Anton could speak, a tall, graceful woman emerged from the bathroom area, a towel draped around her shoulders. The woman was Caitlin Moore, a name he had not uttered or even allowed himself to think about in nearly 8 years. The same Caitlin whose laughter used to soothe his most restless nights, whose eyes once convinced him that there were more important things than an executive's climb to the top. Suddenly, it felt as though the carefully constructed fortress of his present life had a gaping hole. Caitlin froze, face draining of color, leaving her stunned. The twins, as if on cue, stepped closer to their mother. The cabin's silence was taut with the tension of old memories and new shocks. Neither Anton nor Caitlin spoke a word for a moment, too many unspoken questions swirling through their minds. Finally, Caitlin broke the silence. You shouldn't be here," she said quietly. But her trembling voice betrayed anger, heartbreak, and a trace of fear all at once. Her eyes darted from him to the corridor, worried that others might witness this unwanted reunion. Anton stumbled for words, his polished composure uncharacteristically shattered. I'm sorry. I was looking for my suite. The door was open." He looked at the children again, heart pounding. Yes, the resemblance was unmistakable. Their eyes, that same defiant tilt of the chin. My God, he thought, they could be mine. But how? How could he not have known? Before he could form a coherent question, Caitlin gently but firmly took the children by the shoulders. "Go to the bedroom," she murmured. "Now." One of the boys, the braver one, gave Anton one last curious glance before following his brother into the adjoining room. The door clicked shut behind them, leaving only Anton and Caitlin standing amidst a raging storm of emotion. He tried again. "Caitlin, I had no idea you'd be here. I didn't know about them. My flight was last minute. His words tangled as if he were a junior executive stumbling through a failed presentation. Caitlin's eyes were cold. "And you expect me to just open my arms and say everything's fine? It's been 7 years, Anton. 7 years since you disappeared from my life. You said you'd return after finalizing your big deal in Hong Kong, remember? That was the last message I got. Then, nothing." He felt the guilt assault him. It was true. He had left abruptly, chasing a multi-million-dollar opportunity that demanded every bit of his focus. In the swirl of negotiations and expansions, he had convinced himself that reaching out to Caitlin could wait, just until the next major investor meeting concluded or the next wave of acquisitions settled. Days turned into weeks, weeks into months, and eventually he told himself it was too late, too complicated, and maybe he had feared that his unstoppable ambition would never align with Caitlin's quieter dreams. In chasing his empire, he'd abandoned the one promise that mattered. "I never meant for it to go like that," he admitted, voice hoarse. "I told myself I'd come back, but the timing was—" "Don't!" Caitlin's expression flared with hurt. "Stop looking for excuses. You left me to face a pregnancy alone. Do you have any idea?" She fought back tears, inhaling sharply. "When I first found out, I called you and texted you. No response. I wrote letters." Anton felt an invisible weight press on his chest. "Letters? I never received—" But he stopped. Could it be possible that in the avalanche of corporate relocations and an ever-shifting staff that screened his mail, he had blindly ignored them? Regret slashed through him like a blade. The tension in the cabin was overwhelming. The overhead lights flickered slightly as the cruise liner shifted to a new heading. A wave against the hull caused a momentary imbalance. Anton steadied himself against the dresser, hearing the distant hum of celebration from the decks above, ironically reminding him that they were on a pleasure voyage filled with amusements and deals. Yet here in cabin 510, a drama from his past threatened to break everything he knew. "Caitlin," he breathed, stepping a little closer. "I never knew about the twins. Had I known, but they must be about 7 years old." His mind spun, grasping at the timeline. She nodded curtly, each movement radiating anger. "Yes, 7. 2 boys who needed a father while I tried to piece together some kind of stable life for them. And now, as if by fate, we end up on the same cruise." She shook her head. "I should have known. Bad luck seems to follow me wherever I go." He attempted to place a reassuring hand on her shoulder, but she jerked away. "Don't touch me," she warned. "We're not those people anymore." The sting of her words was tangible. Anton realized the conversation, loaded with years of betrayal, was on the brink of exploding. Part of him wanted to apologize profusely, to beg her to let him explain everything. Another part, the CEO side, was methodically thinking about how this scandal might blow up if the press got wind of it. Because he was, after all, the unstoppable force in the business world. The tabloids would salivate at a secret paternity scandal. In the background, he heard the muffled sound of one of the twins coughing. That small, ordinary noise struck him more powerfully than anything else. He was a stranger to his own children. The realization rattled the foundation of the life he'd built. Over the years, he had convinced himself that love, relationships, and family were all second to empire building. But seeing them, he felt something shift irreversibly. Are they healthy? Do they go to school? What do they know about me?" he asked softly, voice quivering. Caitlin's eyes flashed. "I managed without you. That's all you need to know," she said, defiance warring with sorrow in every syllable. "And if you think you can just waltz back into our lives because you finally stumbled into the wrong cabin, you're mistaken. I won't let you break their hearts the way you broke mine." Anton's phone rang in his pocket, loud and insistent. Probably one of his business partners waiting for an update. Ordinarily, he would pick up without hesitation, deals being the lifeblood of everything he'd done. But now, he slid the phone onto the nearest table, ignoring it. His hands felt clammy, his chest felt tight. He locked eyes with Caitlin, trying to convey some fragment of sincerity. "This is not how I wanted to find out. You have every reason to hate me. But please, help me understand. Don't shut me out." Before she could respond, the cabin door swung open behind him with a loud click. A flash bulb went off. A photographer, presumably from some tabloid or gossip website, was standing there, eyes wide at the spectacle. Anton turned in shock, the bright light of a camera capturing the scene. Another flash, and another. The journalist's grin grew bigger with each shot, sensing the golden scandal on the horizon. The high-profile CEO in a secret cabin, confronting a woman with 2 boys who bore a striking resemblance to him. "Get out!" Caitlin screamed, lunging to push the intruder back out into the corridor. The man stumbled, dropping a lens cap but not his camera, snapping more pictures as he retreated. Anton's face burned with rage and alarm. If these photos hit the media, not only his personal life but also the entire business summit on this cruise could spiral into chaos. This was exactly the kind of story that tabloids loved. Wealth, betrayal, unknown children, heartbreak. He rushed after the paparazzo into the corridor, but the man was already sprinting toward the elevator, ignoring staff who shouted for him to slow down. Caitlin stood at the threshold of her cabin, breathing heavily. A small head peeked around the corner from inside the room, one of the twins who had heard the commotion. The child's eyes were wide, searching for safety in all this confusion. Anton returned, fists clenched. "I couldn't catch him," he admitted, voice trembling with adrenaline. "He's probably already blasting those pictures to every tabloid on the planet. This is going to turn into a public scandal." She looked at him with a fierceness that overshadowed his panic. "What do you care about more, your reputation or these children you've just met?" The question stabbed him more deeply than any investor's threat could. Anton inhaled, trying to calm the wave of dread. "Caitlin, I care about them. Just don't," she said, stepping back into her cabin. "We'll see what happens when the storm hits. Don't expect me to show mercy. Not after what you did." And with that, she closed the door in his face, leaving him with the echo of her words and the haunting knowledge that everything in his life was about to change. Alone in the corridor, Anton stared at the blank door. The overhead lights flickered in the hush, as if uncertain themselves. For years he had believed that success meant leaving everything else behind. But now, after a single misstep and the shock of discovering the family he never knew, it felt like the ground beneath him was crumbling. The unstoppable CEO was, for the first time, truly afraid, and the real battle had only just begun. The sun had dipped closer to the horizon, casting long orange reflections across the ocean's surface. On most cruises, this time of day was magical. Laughter ringing around the pool decks, champagne glasses clinking at high-end cocktail bars, couples in evening wear strolling arm in arm. But for Anton Reyes, the millionaire CEO who had just discovered he might be the father of twin boys, the atmosphere was suffocating. He weaved through the corridors toward his own suite, pulse racing with a cocktail of anger and regret. Already rumors were circulating around the ship. Passengers in designer suits whispered behind their hands, turning away the moment he passed. He could practically hear the hush of speculation. Someone must have recognized him or overheard the chaos in cabin 510. Perhaps the paparazzo had already shared a few exclusive snapshots, fueling the rumor mill. Anton's phone buzzed with near-constant notifications from business associates. Each call he ignored only deepened his dread. When he finally reached Suite 504, he shut the door behind him with enough force to rattle the glassware on the coffee table. Leaning against the wall, he tried to center himself, inhaling deeply. The day's events were a tsunami of emotion, all triggered by a single misread cabin number. He wanted to call his publicist, his lawyers, anyone who could mitigate the damage. Yet something in him hesitated. In that brief, chaotic conversation, Caitlin's heartbreak had been so clear. Anton realized that if he rushed to silence the rumors with money or legal threats, he might hurt her and the twins all over again. He stepped toward the panoramic window. From this vantage point, the ocean was vast and calm, a deep indigo that stretched endlessly. But inside, his mind churned. Until hours ago, he'd prided himself on having no regrets. His unstoppable success validated every sacrifice. Or so he'd told himself. Now the weight of his decisions pressed on him like an anchor. A soft chime sounded from the suite's control panel. Room service, perhaps. With a weary sigh, Anton opened the door to find one of the cruise staff, a polite young man in a crisp uniform, holding out a note. "Mr. Reyes, pardon the interruption. Someone left this message for you at reception," the attendant said. Anton accepted the note with a faint nod and thanked him. Heart pounding, he recognized the flourish of handwriting. Caitlin's. He locked the door again, uncertain of whether to feel relief or dread. Carefully, he unfolded the paper. "Meet me at the upper observation deck. 7:30 p.m. Alone. No greeting. No explanation." The words were scrawled in quick, forceful strokes, as though she'd fought her own hesitation to write them. Anton glanced at his watch. He had only about 20 minutes to get there. His first instinct was to question the wisdom of going, especially if paparazzi lurked. But he suspected that if he didn't show, Caitlin would vanish behind her anger, and he might never see her or the twins again. Without wasting another moment, he tossed his phone onto the couch, ignoring the endless calls, and headed back into the corridor. He kept his footsteps rapid but quiet, scanning for any sign of that camera-wielding intruder. The overhead lights glowed softly, reflecting on the polished floor. At one point, a small group of businessmen stopped talking when he passed, then resumed their animated whispers as soon as he was out of earshot. He clenched his fists but forced himself to keep walking. Whatever they thought about him, he had more urgent priorities now. Following signs for the observation deck, he exited onto a smaller open-air platform near the topmost level. It was relatively deserted, a quiet space where the hustle of the dining halls and bars faded into the background. The wind, carrying the tang of salt, whipped around him. He spotted Caitlin leaning against the railing, arms folded, hair blowing. Even in tension, she had an elegance that time had never erased. For a moment, neither spoke. She didn't turn around immediately, as if testing whether he'd truly come. Then she glanced over her shoulder. His heart lurched at the sight of her pained expression. "You got my note," she said flatly. He approached slowly, trying not to crowd her. "I did. Thank you for agreeing to talk." Caitlin scoffed softly, gaze fixed on the horizon. "I'm only doing this to keep the situation from getting worse. The press is already circling like vultures, and I need to protect my boys." The word "my" stung Anton. He wanted to correct her. "Aren't they my boys too?" But he knew he had no right to that claim. Not yet. Perhaps not ever. A deep hush clung to the deck. Below them, the ship's lights glowed in neat rows, and far off the band's music drifted from a lounge. But here, the only real sound was the thrum of the ocean. The wind tugged at Caitlin's loose sweater, and for the first time, Anton noticed subtle signs of exhaustion on her face, shadows beneath her eyes, tension around her mouth. 7 years of single parenthood can do that, he thought grimly. "Look," she began, biting her lip. "I'm not naive enough to think you're the same man who walked out on me. You've clearly built an empire. You're someone important. But in everything I've read about you, never once did you mention a family. Did we even cross your mind?" Anton swallowed. "I never forgot you," he said quietly, resting his arms on the railing beside her but leaving a safe gap. "That's the truth, whether you believe it or not. My deals became all-consuming. I got lost in the expansions, the money, the ambition. But you and I parted on uncertain terms. I thought—" He paused, struggling to articulate. "I convinced myself you were better off without me until I had everything in place. Then 1 year bled into another." "Convenient," she muttered, blinking rapidly. The wind ruffled her hair. "But did you once think maybe I needed you for something more important than money or success? Our children needed you. I was terrified when I realized I was pregnant. No, scratch that. Terrified when I realized I was carrying twins and had no one to turn to." He let out a shaky breath. "I can't change the past, Caitlin. I wish I had come back sooner. I never wanted you to go through that alone." They stood in silence, side by side against the gleaming rail, hearts pounding. Eventually, Caitlin wrapped her arms around herself, voice subdued. "Everything is about to explode, and I don't want to expose the twins to that kind of scrutiny. They're still so young. I can handle the gossip about me, but it's not fair for them to be dragged into your media circus." Anton turned, searching her face. "You're right. None of this is fair. Let me at least do something. I can call my publicist, spin a story, keep them out of the headlines. This doesn't have to blow up." Caitlin laughed bitterly. "You think you can control everything? That's exactly who you are, isn't it? The unstoppable CEO who manipulates the narrative to suit his brand. Don't get me wrong, I'd prefer not to be hounded by photographers, but the truth might get out anyway, and you can't fix all this with money or PR spins." He nodded, accepting the rebuke. "Then tell me how I can help. Whatever you need, cooperation, finances, private security if it comes to that, just say the word. I won't run away again." She studied him, her once trusting eyes now guarded. "I'm not sure how we do this. Part of me never wants to see you again. But those kids in the next cabin, they deserve answers. And if you want to step up, I won't outright deny you." Her voice trembled as she admitted, "They ask so many questions about where they came from. I've tried to protect them, maybe too much." Anton's throat felt thick with an emotion he hadn't allowed himself to feel in years. Pure vulnerability. "I need to meet them," he whispered. "Or at least talk to them, properly. Please." Caitlin tensed. "We'll see. They already suspect something strange. Seeing you barge in earlier, it startled them. One of the twins is having trouble sleeping because he's worried about the man who upset Mommy." She forced a harsh laugh. "Congratulations, you've made quite a first impression." He closed his eyes, shame rolling over him in waves. the bright, unstoppable CEO reduced to a trembling father-to-be, begging for a chance. You tell me when, where, how, I'll do whatever it takes. The wind rattled the glass panels behind them. Caitlin hesitated, letting the hush stretch so long Anton feared she might walk away again. Then, quietly, she said, "Tomorrow morning. There's a small family lounge next to the kids' activity center on deck 12. They open at 9. I'll bring them for breakfast. If you show up, well, that's on you." A spark of hope flickered in Anton's chest. He nodded. "I'll be there. Thank you." She turned, stepping away from the railing, eyes reflecting the swirl of her inner conflict. "If you make a scene or break their hearts, I swear." She trailed off, but the threat lingered. "I understand," he replied. "I promise I'll be respectful." Nodding once, Caitlin started walking back toward the door. Anton watched her retreating form, torn between relief at having a second chance and regret for all the years he'd missed. Before disappearing inside, she paused. Her voice carried over the wind. "And about that photographer? Keep your lawyers in check. I'm used to solving my problems without scandal, and I don't need your meddling to blow everything wide open." Then she was gone, leaving him alone under the golden-pink sky. In the stillness of that deck, Anton inhaled the briny air, thinking of the twin boys just below on this massive ship. Twins, his sons. Suddenly, the ambitions, the monumental deals waiting in his inbox, felt trivial. He had discovered a whole new world, one where his success might mean nothing if he lost the chance to be a father. Leaning his forehead against the cold metal railing, he closed his eyes, letting the hush of the ocean fill his thoughts. "Tomorrow morning," he whispered to himself. In a lifetime of sealing business deals, none had ever felt so urgent or so daunting. And for the first time in years, the unstoppable CEO wasn't sure if he was ready to face the future that awaited him at 9 a.m. on deck 12. Anton hardly slept. He remained sprawled in the chair by his suite's wide window, his gaze fixed on the moonlit waves, replaying Caitlin's words over and over in his mind. By the time dawn crept in, blue-gray light casting slender shadows across the plush carpet, his thoughts were racing ahead to that breakfast meeting with the twins. Normally, the unstoppable CEO began his mornings methodically, an hour of reading market updates, a strong coffee, a barrage of emails. But today he felt no urge to check his phone or crack open his laptop. His entire focus revolved around the clock's slow march toward 9 o'clock. When 8:30 a.m. finally arrived, Anton slipped into a simple polo and slacks, forgoing his usual tailored suits. He wanted nothing about him to intimidate the children. Instead of polished leather shoes, he put on casual loafers. As he looked in the mirror, he barely recognized himself. Tension bracketed his mouth and lines of fatigue were visible beneath his eyes. Taking a final breath, he stepped out of his suite, determined to keep his word. The family lounge on deck 12 was tucked near the children's play area, bright walls adorned with cheerful murals of cartoon fish, a smattering of kid-sized tables, and a short buffet with fruit juices and pastries. A few windows overlooked the endless horizon of water. Despite the whimsical decor, Anton's stomach clenched as if he were about to walk on stage at the biggest investor pitch of his life. He arrived 15 minutes early. The lounge was quiet at this hour. Most business guests on the cruise ate breakfast in the adults-only dining rooms. Here, he spotted only a handful of families, a couple with a toddler in a high chair, a grandmother coaxing a shy granddaughter toward a balloon display. Nerves buzzing, he took a seat at a small table. The child-sized chairs made him feel both awkward and slightly foolish, but he stayed there, waiting. At 8:55, Caitlin appeared at the entrance, each hand placed gently on a boy's shoulder. The twins' dark hair and serious eyes gave them a striking resemblance to Anton, who rose from the tiny chair abruptly, heart pounding. One of them, perhaps the braver twin, looked right at Anton. The other clung to Caitlin's sleeve, eyes darting between his mother and this strange man. Anton fought the urge to rush over. Instead, he reminded himself to remain calm and quiet. Caitlin approached, her posture taut. She gave him a curt nod in greeting, then looked down at her sons. "This is Anton," she said softly, voice wavering just a bit. "The man we talked about last night." The twins remained silent for a long moment, each wearing a mixture of curiosity and apprehension. Finally, the bolder one spoke. "Are you the man who came in our room?" "Yes, that was me," Anton admitted, clearing his throat. He was keenly aware of how bizarre the situation sounded. I'm sorry if I scared you. I thought it was my room by mistake." He knelt slightly so he wouldn't tower over them. "It's very nice to meet you, really." The braver twin blinked. "I'm Matteo." Then he patted his brother's arm gently. "He's Mark." Mark just pressed closer to Caitlin, half hiding behind her leg, though his wide eyes never left Anton's face. Anton offered a small, hopeful smile. "Matteo and Mark, you have great names." He glanced at Caitlin for guidance, but her expression was careful, locked. "Would you two like to eat something? We can sit together." Matteo shrugged. "I'm hungry." Mark, still clinging to Caitlin, gave a tiny nod. Caitlin gently guided the boys toward the small buffet table, where they selected cereal, fruit, and small pastries shaped like shells. Anton hovered behind, not wanting to crowd them. Every gesture felt tentative, as though he were tiptoeing through a fragile dream. As they returned to the table, Caitlin slid into a seat with Mark on her left, Matteo on her right. Anton settled across from them, the table comically small for his long legs. Silence descended. The twins fidgeted with their spoons, occasionally sneaking glances at Anton. He wondered if Caitlin had told them that he was, in fact, their father, or if she'd kept it vague. His heart hammered. He took a small breath and tried to speak. "So, I hear you two like ships?" he began, latching onto something neutral. "Caitlin, your mom, mentioned this is your first time on a cruise." Matteo nodded eagerly. "There's a slide up on the top deck. It's so fast you spin around and whoosh, land in the pool. It's awesome." "It's big, though," Mark interjected quietly, eyes lowered. "At night I can hear the engine. It's scary sometimes." His voice carried the timbre of an unspoken question. "Do you care that I'm scared?" Anton's chest tightened. "I get it. It's like a giant hotel that floats. When I was your age, the idea of being on the open ocean probably would have made me nervous too. But the staff here is very good. They keep everyone safe." Mark peeked up, curiosity battling with caution. Meanwhile, Caitlin watched, her arms folded, expression guarded. Then she gently touched Mark's shoulder. "Do you want more juice?" "Okay," Mark murmured. He stood and Caitlin accompanied him back toward the buffet. This left Anton alone with Matteo, who kept stabbing a strawberry piece with his fork. "Mom says you might know us or something," Matteo said, brow furrowed. "But you were never at our house." Anton's throat constricted. He realized this child was trying to puzzle out a lifetime of absence in a single moment. I met your mom a long time ago," Anton said gently. "We cared about each other, but then I had to leave for work, and I didn't come back. I'm really sorry about that." Matteo's eyes flashed with confusion. "You didn't come back? Why?" Anton opened his mouth, but no adequate words formed. How could he explain the selfish pursuit of profit and ambition to a 7-year-old? Instead, he tried honesty. "I made a mistake, a big one, and it hurt your mom, and I didn't even know about you and Mark." He paused, voice tinged with regret. "If I had known, I would have tried to be here from the start." Matteo studied him for a heartbeat. Then he dropped the fork, crossing his arms. "Mom cried last night. She said to be careful. Are you going to leave again?" The question stabbed Anton's conscience. He shook his head. "I don't want to. I want to stay around this time, if it's okay with both of you." but I know I have to earn your trust." He inhaled shakily. "I'm not going anywhere right now." Mateo just stared and then nodded once, a gesture that might have contained a tiny flicker of hope. He went back to his fruit without another word. Caitlin returned with Mark, who carefully slid back into his seat. She handed him a new glass of orange juice, her gaze flicking from Anton to Mateo as though evaluating the tension. She set her own small plate down but barely touched the food. "Anton," she said quietly, "do you have any idea how many reporters might be following you on this cruise?" He exhaled. "I'm not certain. Usually these business cruises have some financial journalists, maybe society columnists. They do puff pieces on CEOs to fill out the cruise publicity. It's possible 1 or 2 paparazzi came looking for a scandal, especially after that fiasco with the camera last night." Mateo piped up. "What's a paparazzi?" Mark gave a shy answer. "They take pictures for magazines and stuff, right, Mom?" Caitlin nodded grimly, keeping her gaze on Anton. "Yes, and I don't want them near the boys." She lowered her voice, though the lounge was still fairly empty. "I know your immediate reaction is to call your lawyers, but that might just make them more interested. Please, can we handle this quietly?" He leaned in, voice gentle. "Of course, I promise I won't cause a scene. Let me see if I can discreetly buy any photos or get them off the market. I'm used to containing potential PR disasters, but I'll do it carefully, I swear." She exhaled, tension rippling through her shoulders. "All right, but if I sense things getting worse, I'll take the boys off this ship at the next port. I mean it." A pang of alarm shot through Anton. He nodded. Understood. During the next half hour, the twins gradually eased into conversation. Mateo described the water slide in detail. Mark spoke about a balloon artist who made them silly hats. Every so often they'd look at Anton with that mix of fascination and wariness. Caitlin mostly observed, protective but no longer as rigidly distant. Though she still flinched any time Anton leaned too close, it was more than he'd dared hope for. They were finishing up when the peaceful morning shattered. A group of onlookers gathered at the lounge entrance, some wearing press badges, others just curious passers-by. Whispers spread through the room like wildfire. "That's Anton Reyes, right? Did you hear the rumor? He's got kids." Caitlin's face went pale. Mateo and Mark glanced at the growing crowd, then shrank into their seats. Anton stood, voice tight. "I'll handle it." He walked over, raising a hand. "Ladies and gentlemen, please. My friends and I are trying to have a private meal. If you have questions—" A tabloid reporter, microphone in hand, stepped forward. "Mr. Reyes, is it true these twins are your children? Can you confirm or deny, sir?" Anton clenched his jaw. "I'm not discussing my private life. This is inappropriate. Please leave the family area." Click, click. Several phone cameras flashed. Caitlin rose, shielding the boys behind her. The chatter grew louder. A handful of parents bristled at the disturbance. Staff tried in vain to usher the reporters away. Tension crackled in the air. "Caitlin," Anton called gently, seeing her eyes blaze with panic. "Take the boys. I'll keep them busy." She nodded once, guiding Mark and Mateo through a side door that led toward the kids' club. Anton faced the small horde of curious onlookers. Drawing on his corporate persona, he forced a level, measured tone. "Look, I respect the media's interest, but you're disrupting other passengers, families especially. Out of decency, can we please relocate this conversation?" A few recognized that the cruise staff was closing in. Reluctant, they backed away, continuing to snap pictures. Anton's heart thudded. The damage might already be done. But at least Caitlin and the kids had slipped away from the worst of it. Once the reporters were corralled back into the corridor, the lounge's manager approached. "I'm so sorry, Mr. Reyes. They must have gotten word from the front desk. We'll increase security." "No, I understand," Anton muttered, scanning for any sign of Caitlin. She was gone. "But this mustn't happen again in the children's area." By the time he navigated the hallways to find them, he spotted Caitlin outside the kids' club, arms folded protectively, speaking in hushed tones to a staff member. Mark was clinging to her waist. Mateo paced restlessly. "They're going to be fine here," the staff member reassured Caitlin. "We'll block any unauthorized visitors." Caitlin gave a brusque nod, then turned as Anton approached. Her eyes were full of anger and betrayal, but also fear. "This is exactly what I didn't want. We can't even have breakfast without cameras flashing in the boys' faces." Anton pressed his lips together, voice quiet. "I'm so sorry. I tried to keep them away. Let me coordinate with security. I promise I'll do whatever it takes to protect you and them." Caitlin regarded him for a moment, as if deciding whether to trust him. Then she sighed. "We'll be here at the kids' area for a while. Let's speak again later, away from the public. But please, fix this, Anton. For their sake." He nodded solemnly. "Yes, I will." She shepherded the twins inside, one on each side, leaving Anton in the corridor, the echo of that chaotic scene still ringing in his ears. With a determined breath, he pulled out his phone. Time to contact his legal team and spin masters, but quietly, discreetly. He refused to let those pictures blow up into a front-page scandal. For once, it wasn't about protecting his brand. It was about defending two little boys who bore his face. He braced himself, anticipating the swirling storm of media. As the unstoppable CEO, he had deflected controversies and market crashes, but none of that felt as raw or important as safeguarding the fragile new connection he'd just formed. Sliding the phone back into his pocket, Anton strode down the hallway. Inside him flared a focused resolve. No matter the cost, he wouldn't fail Caitlin or the twins again. Anton paced the narrow hallway outside the kids' activity center, phone pressed to his ear. The line crackled for a moment before his head of PR. Danielle picked up with her usual efficient crispness. "Danielle, I'm in a situation," Anton said quietly, glancing at the children's door. He didn't want the conversation overheard. "We have to stop a paparazzo from publishing pictures that involve two minors. My children." There was a momentary pause on the other end. He imagined her neatly painted nails tapping out notes on her keyboard. "Understood. Can you give me the specifics?" Anton exhaled. "I'm on this business cruise. The mother of the children is also here unexpectedly. A tabloid photographer got pictures of me with the boys. I don't want them blasted in the press." "All right," she said calmly. "First step is to identify which outlet he might sell them to. Could be one of the gossip magazines or even a blogger. We can attempt to buy them outright, but that sometimes backfires if the photographer demands a higher sum. Alternatively, we can threaten legal action under privacy and child protection grounds." "Do it quietly, please," Anton urged, lowering his voice to a hush. "I don't want a big splash or intimidation stunt, just see if we can contain it." "Of course, Mr. Reyes, I'll handle it." He hung up, resisting the familiar pull of relief that came with delegating problems. In the past, Danielle had smoothed out crises from business fiascos to personal slip-ups. But this time, the stakes felt different. He wasn't just safeguarding his corporate brand, he was protecting two innocent boys who didn't deserve the scrutiny. Brushing a hand through his hair, Anton tried to reorient himself. He remembered that he still had vital business obligations on this cruise, meetings with potential partners, an upcoming panel discussion, networking events. Under normal circumstances, he'd revel in that environment, wearing an impeccable suit, dazzling everyone with his unstoppable CEO persona. But the notion of stepping into conference rooms now, when his family life was in turmoil, felt surreal and hollow. His watch read 10:03 a.m. The first major meeting started in less than an hour. He'd have to pull himself together. But before he could formulate his next move, the door to the kids' club opened. Caitlin stepped out, carrying a small backpack. She closed the door carefully behind her, likely so the twins wouldn't overhear adult talk. "Done with your phone call?" she asked, arms folded. The tightness around her eyes betrayed the stress she was under. He nodded. "Yes, I'm trying to stop the pictures from going public." Her gaze flicked around the corridor, making sure no one was eavesdropping. "They're inside drawing with the staff. Mateo wanted to keep playing, so I figured I'd come out here." She paused, biting her lip. "Look, I appreciate you're trying to contain this, but if it spirals out of control—" "I know," Anton finished gently. "You'll leave at the next port. I understand." She nodded in confirmation, then adjusted the backpack strap. "We can't live in the shadows of cameras, especially not them. I won't let them be turned into gossip fodder." Emotion welled up in Anton's throat. "I promise, Caitlin, they won't. I'll do everything to protect them. His words trailed off. It still felt surreal that he was speaking about them, his own twin sons, after years of forging ahead alone. A wave of tension seemed to roll between them. Neither moved for a moment. Then Caitlin's expression softened a fraction. "Anyway, I have errands around the ship. Can I trust that you won't show up with an entourage or anything?" He managed a small, sad smile. "I'm flying solo on this, aside from minimal PR help. Let me escort you at least. There are too many prying eyes." She hesitated, then exhaled. "All right, but keep your distance so they don't assume anything if we're spotted." He nodded. "Understood." They walked side by side, though a few steps apart, heading down the corridor toward the central atrium. The overhead lighting glowed warmly on polished floors. Passing other passengers, they heard hushed chatter. Anton felt eyes flick in their direction. Some recognized him, but no one approached. The hush of rumors was enough to put Caitlin on edge. He could sense it in her posture. Midway to the elevator, Caitlin paused in front of a large glass window. The ocean sparkled in the late morning sun. She inhaled the salty air that seeped in through small vents. "I never expected to see you again," she said softly, her reflection faint against the glass. Anton's reflection stood beside hers, shoulders bent with regret. "I always told myself I'd find you after I stabilized my business empire. By the time I made enough space in my life, too much time had passed. I was afraid you'd already closed that door." Her hands tightened around the backpack straps. "I did close it. I tried to, until I realized I was pregnant, and then life got complicated." He nodded. "Complicated for you, but not for me. I just kept forging ahead, oblivious." Shadows flickered across his face. "I'm so sorry." She looked at him out of the corner of her eye. "Apologies don't erase the past, but maybe they can shape the future if you're sincere." She let the moment linger, then stepped away from the window. "I need to pick up some medication for Mark. He's prone to ear infections, and he said his ear feels a little funny. That's why we've got this backpack of supplies." Concern pulled at Anton's voice. "Does he need to see the ship's doctor?" She shrugged. "Maybe. I have some antibiotics from home just in case, but I'll watch him. It's not your problem." "He's my son," Anton said, the words catching him off guard. It was the first time he'd said it so plainly, to her face. "That makes it my problem too." Caitlin's eyes flickered with a hint of something, appreciation maybe, or fear that he'd overstep. She swallowed. "Yes, I suppose that's true." They rode the elevator in silence, descending to Deck 5, where the ship's medical center and a small pharmacy kiosk were located. The ride felt oddly claustrophobic, not because of the space, but because of the unspoken tension. Anton was used to dominating boardrooms, not navigating old heartbreak and fatherhood regrets in a cramped elevator. When the doors slid open, he motioned for Caitlin to lead. Deck 5 was quieter, with plush carpeting and discreet signage pointing to the spa, the fitness center, and, in a back corner, the medical suite. A glass case displayed brochures on seasickness remedies and minor injury care. Caitlin made her way to a small window labeled Pharmacy Check-In, pressing a buzzer for assistance. A young pharmacist in a white coat appeared. "Good morning. How can I help?" Caitlin explained Mark's symptoms, carefully avoiding mention of her personal drama. The pharmacist offered a mild eardrop solution to use alongside any antibiotic the child might already have. Anton observed, tension coiled in his chest. He wondered if this was what fatherhood should have been like all along: small errands, concern about earaches, comforting a worried mother. He felt a mix of guilt and gratitude that he was here now at least. Once Caitlin had the medication, they retreated into the corridor again. "I'm glad you're able to take care of him," Anton said, voice subdued. "But if you need anything, extra help or the ship's physician, I'll cover it." She gave a curt nod. "I know you have resources, and for what it's worth, I appreciate that you're not dismissing this." Anton hesitated. Would you mind if I came by later to check on him? I can keep my distance if you prefer, but I just want to know he's okay." Caitlin's lips parted as though she might reject the offer outright. Then she pressed them closed. "Let's see how he feels after lunch. I'll text you on the ship's messaging system." Her tone was careful, like one balancing on a tightrope. "We don't need to suffocate them with all this new attention, especially not Mark, who's always been more sensitive." He nodded. "Right. I understand." A beat passed, and he recalled the time. "I have a meeting in half an hour, a panel on corporate sustainability. I can't skip it, but I'm going to do my best to keep it short. Afterwards, I'll get back to my suite and wait for your message." Her eyes flicked to his watch. "All right. I'll be around. If you see me in passing, just let me handle the conversation, okay? I can't have any more gossip swirling." Of course. They walked side by side a moment longer, then parted ways at an intersection of corridors. Caitlin took a left, heading for the nearest staircase to return to the kids' area. Anton took a right, making for the conference decks. He reached the large, ornate room where the business panel was scheduled to happen. The difference in atmosphere was jarring. Men and women in sharp suits, grand banners displaying sponsor logos, perfectly arranged seats for a high-profile audience. The door attendants brightened when they spotted him, ushering him to a VIP lounge backstage. Ordinarily, he would stride in with unstoppable confidence, but now his mind was still with Caitlin and the twins on Deck 12, or how Mark might be feeling, or how to keep them safe from paparazzi. One of the event organizers greeted him with a broad smile. "Mr. Reyes, wonderful to see you. We're so eager for your thoughts on new sustainable models for global enterprises. Let's get you set up." Anton mustered a polite nod, letting a production assistant mic him up. He took a seat behind the stage curtain, scanning notes that had been meticulously prepared by his staff. Words like renewable energy, global market strategy, ESG compliance blurred on the page. For once, he found it hard to care about the usual corporate spiel. He smoothed his hair, put on a neutral expression, and stepped onto the stage. The spotlight was glaring, the applause polite yet enthusiastic. As he shook hands with fellow panelists, CEOs, and experts in the sustainability field, he forced a charismatic smile. On the outside, he was the unstoppable CEO, famed for forging unstoppable deals. Inside, he was thinking about two young boys, one possibly sick, and about the woman who'd once shared his life before he left her behind. And he wondered if any success up here would matter if he couldn't figure out how to mend what he'd broken. The panel dragged on, question after question from the moderator. Typically, Anton thrived in these settings, turning complex answers into headlines. But each time he responded, his mind drifted to Mark's earache or to the memory of Mateo's defiant eyes. He had to stop himself from glancing at his phone. The last thing he wanted was for the crowd or cameras to see him distracted. At the session's close, the audience clapped politely. The event's host invited the speakers to pose for a quick photo op. Anton forced the usual confident grin for the cameras, all the while feeling a disconnect that unsettled him. His phone remained on silent in his pocket, no text from Caitlin yet. Still, as soon as he extricated himself from the stage, Various entrepreneurs and financiers approached, eager for a moment of his time, some with tangible business pitches, others seeking a handshake. He listened with half an ear, politely deflecting or promising to connect again. Usually he'd schedule these follow-ups to secure potential deals. Today he had only one urgent priority. By the time he escaped the swirl of suits and stepped into a quieter corridor, it was past 1 o'clock. He tugged out his phone, scanning for messages. Nothing. Anxiety gnawed his stomach. Should he check on them? He recalled Caitlin's request. "I'll text you. Don't push." Maybe Mark was resting, or perhaps she was busy with the kids. With a weary sigh, he made his way to his suite, ignoring a flurry of missed calls from journalists. Inside, the plush surroundings felt emptier than ever. He sank onto a sofa, phone clutched in hand. Each minute crawled. 10 minutes passed, then 15. At last, a beep. Anton nearly dropped the device in his rush to read the message. Caitlin, ship's messaging. Mark resting in cabin, feverish, but not severe. If you want to talk, meet us at the starboard lounge on deck 7 in an hour. Less crowded. Anton let out a breath he hadn't realized he'd been holding. Feverish. He tapped a quick reply. Anton. I'll be there. Thank you for letting me know. Let me know if he needs to see the ship's doctor. No immediate response. That was fine. He'd see her soon enough. He rose, straightening his casual shirt. Before leaving, he had a momentary urge to check in with Danielle, his PR lead, about progress on the paparazzi problem. But time was short, and each second felt precious. He typed out a quick text to Danielle. Anton, any updates on the photos? Danielle, negotiating with the likely buyer. We'll keep you posted. Stand by. His jaw clenched. At least she was on it. Tucking the phone into his pocket, he headed into the corridor, heart pounding. The unstoppable CEO had a new mission, ensuring Mark's well-being and proving to Caitlin he could do more than deliver a slick business pitch. Stepping into the elevator, he pressed the button for deck 7, each ding fueling his resolve. He had lost 7 years. He wouldn't lose this chance. Anton arrived on deck 7 earlier than planned, too anxious to linger in his suite. The starboard lounge was a cozy alcove tucked away from the bustling main promenade, offering panoramic views of the endless sea. Unlike the ship's more glamorous bars, it carried a subdued ambiance, softly lit, with just a few small tables by the windows and a discreet bar in the corner. The usual flurry of passengers seemed absent here. Maybe the midday sun had drawn most people up to the pool decks or out on excursions, which suited Anton perfectly. Privacy was paramount. He found a table near the large window, the tinted glass filtering the bright sky into calmer shades of blue. With each passing minute, a knot of worry tightened in his chest. Mark was ill. Anton still couldn't quite wrap his mind around the fact. He had a child, 2 in fact, one of whom needed care he had never before provided. He replayed the memory of his own childhood, the recollection of his parents fussing over him whenever he got sick. He'd always assumed that when he had children of his own, he'd be there for them from day one. Yet life had taken a different path. Now, with the press hounding them, the timing couldn't feel more precarious. At last, Caitlin entered the lounge, scanning the tables. Mark stood at her side, clutching the small backpack they'd carried earlier. Close behind was Mateo, who peeked around, curiosity evident in his eyes. They looked subdued, no squeals of excitement or wide-eyed marvel at the new surroundings. Clearly, Mark wasn't feeling well. Even from a distance, Anton could see how pale the boy's cheeks were. Anton rose, meeting them halfway. "Is he okay?" he asked softly, gaze flicking down to Mark. "I'm okay," Mark said, though he lacked the energy of a typical 7-year-old. He gave a shy glance at Anton, then huddled closer to Caitlin. "I took the medicine. My ear still hurts, but not as bad." Anton's chest clenched at the quiet admission. He knelt to meet Mark's eye level, doing his best to appear calm rather than panicked. "I'm sorry you're feeling lousy. Is there anything we can do? If you need another checkup?" Mark shook his head. "Mom says to rest and maybe an ice pack for my ear. The lady in the kids' club gave me some juice." He spoke haltingly, as though not entirely certain he wanted to open up to this stranger who claimed to care. Caitlin cleared her throat. "I brought them here because you wanted to see how he was doing. But if it gets too crowded or if the paparazzi show up, we're leaving." She spoke in a low, firm tone. "We've had enough drama for one day." Mateo joined in, eyes darting to Anton. "Mommy says people keep talking about us in the hallways. I heard them say secret children of a millionaire. Is that us?" Caitlin tensed, a flash of frustration in her gaze. "Mateo, sweetie, it's complicated. Some people on board like to gossip. That doesn't mean it's all true." Mateo nodded slowly, but an undercurrent of confusion remained. Anton gestured toward the table. "Please, let's sit." He glanced around, relieved to see just one other couple in the lounge, engrossed in their own conversation. No journalists, no cameras. For the moment at least, they had relative privacy. As they slid into chairs, Mark leaned his head against Caitlin's arm, clearly fatigued. She gently placed a hand over his, murmuring something reassuring. Mateo chose a seat beside his brother, protectively. Anton sat across from them, measuring each breath, the seriousness of the moment robbing him of his usual crisp confidence. "Would you like anything to drink? I can go ask the bartender for water or maybe a warm tea?" Anton offered, glancing at Caitlin for a cue. She looked at Mark. "Want some warm tea with honey, baby?" Mark nodded. "Yes, please. That might help my throat, too." Without hesitation, Anton stood and strode to the bar. A soft-spoken bartender listened to his order: hot chamomile tea with honey, 2 glasses of water, and a glass of orange juice, just in case. While the bartender prepared everything, Anton's phone buzzed in his pocket. A quick glance revealed it was Danielle, his PR lead. He swiped to answer but lowered his voice. "Yes?" Danielle's voice came through the line, hushed but urgent. "We've found the photographer. He's negotiating with 2 tabloid outlets. I'm trying to buy the photos quietly, but they might push the story anyway." Anton's jaw tightened. "If they publish pictures of the twins, I'll consider legal action. Understood?" "Absolutely. But we're dealing with a wild card. He's demanding a hefty sum. I'll keep trying, but you might need to brace for partial leaks." Anton exhaled sharply. "Do what you can. I have to go." He ended the call, adrenaline prickling his nerves. This fiasco was precisely what Caitlin feared. If the photos leaked, especially ones of the kids, it could get ugly fast. He carried the tea tray back to the table, schooling his face into calm. Caitlin picked up on his tension regardless. Her gaze sharpened. He handed her the tea and quietly slid the juice and water toward Mateo, forcing a small smile for the children's sake. "Bad news?" Caitlin asked, keeping her tone measured for the boy's benefit. "Just some business calls," Anton answered evasively, mindful not to alarm Mark or Mateo. "Nothing you need to worry about right now." He caught the flicker in her eyes that said she didn't quite believe him, but she let it pass. Mark sipped his tea carefully. "Tastes good," he murmured. His voice sounded slightly congested, but a bit more relaxed now that he had something soothing for his throat. Anton leaned forward, resting his arms on the table. "Mark, I'm really glad you're here, even if you're not feeling well. If there's anything I can do—" Mateo cut in with a simple question. "Why do people keep saying you're a millionaire? Like a super rich person?" Anton blinked, uncertain how to respond. "Well, I run several companies. That means I get paid a lot of money for what I do. Some people find it interesting to talk about." The simplified explanation felt woefully inadequate. Mateo narrowed his eyes. "So you fix companies and make them better, right?" "That's part of it, yes," Anton said, unsure how far to go. "I help them earn more money or build new products." Mateo considered this with a childlike solemnity. So you could buy anything you want? Like candy or big houses? Anton forced a gentle laugh. I can afford some expensive things, but money doesn't solve everything. Then why didn't you buy a phone to call Mom? Mateo's blunt question sliced through the moment. His youthful logic was unrelenting, and the heartbreak in that inquiry made Caitlin's eyes widen. She opened her mouth to scold him, but Anton raised a hand gently, as though to say it was okay. He looked at Mateo, acknowledging the raw honesty. That's a fair question. I did have a phone. Several, in fact. The problem wasn't money. The problem was me. I was too focused on my job, and I made bad decisions. I hurt your mom, and I hurt both of you without even realizing it. Mateo's lips pressed together, as though trying to reconcile that. You should say sorry. Anton's throat felt tight. I do. I am sorry. It's why I'm here now, trying to make it right. I'm not perfect, but I want a chance to be in your lives. At that, Mark looked up from his tea, eyes watery and uncertain. Mom always said we didn't have a dad around because he was away for work. Is that you? Caitlin swallowed, glancing at Anton, then at her boys. Yes, she finally admitted. He was the one I told you about. Mateo and Mark exchanged a look. Then Mark nestled closer to Caitlin, unsure how to process this sudden confirmation. The admission hung like a fragile cord of possibility. Anton stared at the table, emotions swirling. Regret for all the lost years, relief at hearing Caitlin say it out loud, fear about the road ahead. Minutes passed in near silence, broken only by the low hum of the ocean outside and the clink of Mark's teacup. Eventually, Mateo cleared his throat. So, does that mean we can do stuff together now, like normal dads do? Anton met his gaze directly, chest heavy with both hope and guilt. I'd really like that. If your mom agrees, and if you want me around, I'll do my best to be the kind of dad you deserve. Mateo considered it, face solemn but containing a flicker of tentative warmth. Mark's small voice followed. Will you leave again? Caitlin's grip tightened on Mark's shoulder. The question was one she too silently echoed. Anton struggled to steady his voice. Not if I can help it. I'm staying right here for as long as I'm allowed to. Silence enveloped the table again. No one uttered a word, but the hush spoke volumes. This was a crossroads, and all four of them knew it. Even in the subdued lighting of the lounge, the reality of father and sons meeting at last, under a swirl of paparazzi threats and old scars, was enough to make the room feel electric. A movement near the entrance caught Anton's attention. A man with a small camera stepped in, scanning the lounge. Anton stiffened, heart hammering. Caitlin noticed, turning slightly to see who it was. He didn't appear to be a professional paparazzo, but the tension was undeniable. Maybe another passenger who'd heard the gossip, perhaps just an enthusiast with a camera. But after the morning fiasco, they couldn't risk it. Anton stood, carefully placing himself between the newcomer and the table. Caitlin gently coaxed Mark to stand, and she rose with Mateo at her side. We should go, she whispered. I can't handle more pictures right now. Anton nodded. I'll walk you out. Quietly and quickly, they made their exit, leaving the man by the entrance, unsure, possibly disappointed he hadn't caught anything scandalous. On the way into the corridor, Anton breathed a sigh of relief, though the undercurrent of anxiety persisted. Caitlin looked at him with stern eyes but spoke softly for the boy's sake. We can't keep hiding forever. But for now, let me get them back to the cabin. Mark needs more rest. Anton offered a slow, careful smile. Yes, of course. If you need anything, food, a doctor, or just a break, please let me know. She nodded, guiding the twins toward the elevator. The children clung close, still grappling with the morning's revelations. Before stepping into the lift, Mateo glanced back. Anton gave him a small wave. hoping it conveyed reassurance rather than desperation. Then the doors slid shut. Left alone in the corridor, Anton heard the distant pulse of music from a nearby lounge and the hushed murmurs of fellow passengers drifting by. He felt an unfamiliar ache in his chest, a yearning to follow them upstairs and not leave them in that small cabin alone. But he was still on probation, so to speak. A father figure in the making, not quite welcomed fully yet. He fished out his phone again, scanning for updates from Danielle. Nothing new. Tucking the device away, he wondered how to navigate the next hours without jeopardizing this fragile progress. The unstoppable CEO had faced countless challenges before, but fatherhood, and all its messy, emotional intricacies, was like standing at the edge of a vast, unknown ocean. And ironically, they were literally surrounded by water. Steeling himself, he resolved to protect this new bond at any cost, no matter how many cameras lurked in the shadows or how complicated the path to redemption might be. As he turned to head back to his suite, the memory of Mark's vulnerable question echoed in his mind. "Will you leave again?" Anton's silent vow echoed in his chest. "Never. Not if I can help it." Anton slid his keycard into the door of his suite and stepped inside, the hush of the space enveloping him. The tension in his shoulders refused to unwind. He'd just come from the starboard lounge, where Mark's pale face and Mateo's direct questions still echoed in his mind. And of course, Caitlin, caught between her protective instincts and the guarded openness she'd shown. Every part of Anton was desperate to do more, but he knew pushing too hard might drive them away. He sank onto the cream-colored sofa, ignoring the tempting view of the sparkling ocean through the balcony windows. His phone rested on the table, silent for the moment. No new calls from journalists or from his PR lead, Danielle. The only sign of life in the suite was the faint hum of the air conditioning. As he ran a hand through his hair, he let out a slow, deliberate breath. He needed to think. What came next? A gentle knock at the door made him jolt upright. Could Caitlin have come herself? Was Mark worse? He hurried to the entrance and opened it. Instead, he found a man in a crisp uniform, one of the cruise staff. The name tag identified him as Bronny. He offered a polite nod. "Mr. Reyes, I apologize for disturbing you. Could we talk privately for just a moment?" Anton hesitated, scanning the corridor for paparazzi. It seemed clear. He stepped aside, letting Bronny in. "Yes, of course. Is something wrong?" The man stood with professional composure. "I assist with security and VIP coordination here aboard the ship. We've been monitoring the situation." The polite phrase was his discreet way of referring to the swirl of rumors and cameras. "Our team wanted to inform you that certain individuals have been trying to bribe staff for the location of your suite and that of Ms. Moore." Anton's jaw tightened. "So paparazzi are indeed stalking us?" Bronny nodded. "Yes, sir. We have instructions not to disclose cabin assignments, but I thought you should know the pressure is significant. We have no direct control over freelance photographers who booked this cruise independently, but we're stepping up measures to protect passenger privacy." Anton exhaled. "Thank you for letting me know. I'd appreciate if you could keep them away from Deck 12 or wherever Ms. Moore and the children might be." "We'll do our best," Bronny said, carefully placing a small white envelope on the table. "This is a direct line to the senior security officer. If you sense anything urgent, call that number from any ship's phone. We will respond immediately." "Understood." Anton slid the envelope into his jacket pocket. "Thank you." Bronny gave a respectful half-bow and departed. Once again alone, Anton realized the unstoppable power he normally wielded in a corporate setting felt strangely inadequate here. He could have the best PR team, the largest personal fortune, but if a determined paparazzo wanted to create a scandal, it might still happen, especially on a ship where it was hard to hide. He glanced at his phone again, half hoping for a text from Caitlin. Maybe something like, "Mark's resting better now," but there was only silence. With a resigned sigh, he left the suite in search of lunch and maybe a sliver of normalcy. But as soon as he entered the corridor, heads turned. A pair of younger businessmen hushed each other, eyes wide. Anton pretended not to notice. At the far end, a woman with a phone raised it discreetly as if snapping a picture. He pressed on, ignoring the flicker of cameras in the corner of his vision. This was his reality now. If Caitlin or the twins were with him, it would be infinitely worse. He made his way to a quieter cafe near the bow of the ship. Tucked behind glass walls, the cafe overlooked the water with a subdued elegance that reminded him of an upscale executive lounge. Only a few tables were occupied. Anton ordered something light. He had little appetite but forced himself to eat, aware he couldn't afford to run on fumes. As he picked at a tuna salad, his thoughts drifted to the past. It was a memory he'd avoided confronting for years. The night he told Caitlin he was leaving for Hong Kong. How she'd hugged him fiercely, whispered, "Come back soon," and made him promise they'd start looking for a modest home together. He'd told her he'd only be gone a month, but one negotiation led to another. Deals exploded in scale, and by the time he thought of returning, shame paralyzed him. So he threw himself into expansions and new acquisitions, burying regret under success. Now that guilt twisted his stomach more than any paparazzi threat could. He clenched his hands around the fork. Enough. If he'd learned anything over the years, it was that unstoppable determination might fix a fiasco if properly harnessed. He had to channel that same relentless energy into being a father, into protecting Caitlin and the twins, no matter what. At that moment, his phone buzzed. He lunged for it so abruptly that he nearly toppled his iced water. The screen flashed. Danielle, PR lead. Anton answered quickly, trying not to sound desperate. "What's the update?" "Not great," Danielle said, a note of tension in her usually even tone. "The photographer is playing hardball. He claims to have photos of you entering the children's area this morning, plus some from last night outside that other cabin. He's demanding a very high price. He also says a rumor is circulating that you're planning to acknowledge paternity. The tabloids are salivating." Anton pinched the bridge of his nose. "Can we buy him out without drawing more attention?" "He's refusing a standard buyout. He wants a public admission from you that these are your kids, so he can upsell additional pictures, or he'll sell them to the highest bidder." A wave of anger surged. "He's exploiting my children. I won't bend to that. Tell him we'll pursue legal action for invasion of privacy, especially involving minors." Danielle paused. "I did." He laughed it off. "The tabloids thrive on lawsuits. Makes the story bigger. You might need a different angle." Anton inhaled slowly to calm himself. If he goes public, it'll be a circus. The kids will be harassed. Caitlin will vanish. They'll lose any chance of a normal life. His mind raced. "Can we get an injunction, at least temporarily, to block publication?" "I'll see if we can get an emergency order from a judge," Danielle replied. "But that could take time, and we're in international waters right now. Jurisdiction is murky. Just do whatever you can, Danielle. Spare no expense." She sighed. "Understood." He hung up, heart pounding with fury and dread. The notion that some unscrupulous photographer could hold their family hostage was infuriating. The unstoppable CEO in him wanted to storm across the ship, track down the man, and buy every single memory card he owned. But Caitlin's worried face made him pause. She wouldn't want an ugly confrontation that might land them in more headlines. He realized with clarity, if he acted rashly, it would only confirm the scandal and intensify the media-feeding frenzy. His phone buzzed again, and for a moment, he feared it was more bad news. But the display read, "Caitlin, ship's messaging." His breath caught. He quickly opened the message. "Caitlin, Mark's sleeping. No change yet, but no worse. Mateo's bored, so I'm going to let him wander the ship for a bit. We'll avoid crowded spots. Just an update." Anton felt his pulse steady. Mark wasn't getting worse, at least. He typed back, "Anton, thanks for letting me know. If you want me to keep Mateo company or help in any way, just say the word." He waited, staring at the screen. 10 seconds passed. 20. Then the typing indicator blinked. "Caitlin, he asked if you'd show him around, actually. He's curious about the top decks, but only if you can handle it discreetly. A spark of relief and excitement ignited. The thought of sharing even a small father-son moment with Mateo thrilled and terrified him in equal measure. "Anton, I'd love that. When and where?" Caitlin's reply was almost immediate. "Caitlin, meet us at the miniature golf area in 30 minutes. We'll see if it's quiet enough." He smiled, something close to genuine relief flooding him. The boy wanted to spend time with him. That was a start. He sent a quick acknowledgement, then rose from the table, leaving the half-eaten salad behind. On his way out, he tossed a few bills down as a tip, ignoring the curious stares from a couple nearby. Walking briskly, he rehearsed how to avoid camera lenses and nosy passengers. The top decks could be busy, especially on a sunny afternoon. But maybe, if they stayed in corners or timed it right, they could slip by unnoticed. If not, well, he'd shield Mateo as best he could. He had visions of father and son laughing over a missed golf shot, maybe exchanging a teasing grin. It was a small, ordinary activity, something he'd never done but always imagined doing with a future child. Now that future was here, albeit in a chaotic swirl. As he stepped into the elevator, adrenaline surged anew. He was about to take a genuine step into fatherhood, showing a curious 7-year-old around the ship. A normal fatherly gesture overshadowed by scandal, cameras, and nearly a decade's worth of neglected promises. Yet for the first time in years, he felt something akin to hope. If, even for an hour, he could build a small bridge to Mateo, show him that not every adult vanished when work got tough, maybe that would matter more than any business deal. The elevator doors opened onto a sunlit deck, the hum of chatter and poolside laughter drifting in. People in swimsuits or casual cruise wear meandered about, but his gaze sharpened on the overhead signage pointing to the miniature golf area further forward. Biting back nerves, he moved along the deck, weaving among sunbathers and families with strollers. A sense of purpose filled him. He might be racing against paparazzi threats, wrangling an unstoppable PR crisis, and juggling the heartbreak he'd inflicted on Caitlin. Yet beneath it all, one fact shone through. A son had asked to see him. And this time, Anton Reyes, unstoppable CEO, would not fail to show up. Anton approached the miniature golf area at the front of the ship. There were 9 holes arranged on a carefully designed green, each hole featuring playful obstacles. A small pirate flag, a wooden bridge, even a tiny lighthouse. It overlooked the open sea, offering a spectacular view of endless blue. On most days, this spot would be crowded with passengers, parents following their shrieking kids, couples laughing while they took silly pictures. But this afternoon, to Anton's relief, the course was quiet. From a distance, he spotted Caitlin standing off to the side by a railing scanning the deck. In her casual summer blouse and light jeans, she looked so different from the memories he'd carried. That single suitcase morning years ago, her eyes brimming with sadness. Now the same eyes carried caution and a flicker of relief when they landed on him. At her side, Mateo hopped from foot to foot, clearly bursting with excitement. The moment the boy noticed Anton, he bounded forward, though he stopped short a few paces away, as if catching himself. His face was a mix of curiosity and bashfulness. "Mom said you'd show me around," he said, trying to sound casual. He held a tiny putter that the ship's staff must have given him. "Yes," Anton replied, deliberately keeping his voice calm. He offered a friendly smile. "I thought we could start here, do a round of mini-golf. That okay?" Mateo nodded enthusiastically. "But is it just me and you?" He glanced at Caitlin, unsure if she was staying. She ran a hand over her son's hair. "I'll watch from the sidelines." Turning to Anton, she lowered her voice. "I'll give you two a chance to talk, but remember, no big scenes." He heard the warning in her tone. "Don't push too much. Don't spook my boy. Don't let yourself be caught in a media swarm." "I promise," he said, meeting her eyes. "We'll keep it low-key." With a slight hesitation, She stepped back, leaning on the railing under the shade of an umbrella. A lone cruise attendant manned a small kiosk for handing out golf balls and putters, busy texting on her phone. Besides that, no other guests were on the course. It felt almost too perfect, a fleeting respite from the tension that stalked them elsewhere on the ship. Anton turned to Mateo, gesturing toward the first hole. "All right, let's see how good you are, buddy." Mateo raised the putter, surveying the hole's modest ramp. "I've never done this, but I watched a video once. You just aim, right?" He placed a bright orange ball at the tee. "Yes, just try to hit it in a gentle line toward the hole. Here, let me show you." He positioned himself carefully, demonstrating the stance. Feet shoulder width, slight bend at the knees, gentle swing. Mateo, eyes bright, imitated him. Then he swung the putter, a bit too forcefully. The ball shot forward, jumped the ramp, and rolled far beyond the intended hole, clacking against the border of fake grass. Mateo's eyes went wide. "Whoa, that's harder than it looks." Anton couldn't help a small laugh. "It's okay. Mini golf is all about figuring out the right touch. Try again, a little softer." Mateo scampered after the ball, shoulders shaking with contained laughter. Caitlin watched from the railing, her expression a careful blend of worry and faint amusement. Anton saw it out of the corner of his eye but refocused on Mateo, determined to give the boy his full attention. Over the next few minutes, they worked through the hole. Each time Mateo overshot, he grimaced and tried to adjust. Each success lit his face with glee. Anton clapped or gave a low cheer when Mateo finally sank the ball in 3 strokes, more out of luck than skill. The boy's grin was infectious. "I did it!" he exclaimed, punching the air. "Nicely done!" Anton handed him a high five, which the boy returned with gusto. "Let's move on to the next one." They meandered to hole number 2, this one featuring a small spinning windmill prop. Mateo's gaze flicked from Anton to the windmill. "This is fun," he said, sounding almost surprised. "We never did this stuff before. Mom always said mini golf was too expensive when we went to fairs and stuff." A pang hit Anton's chest. "Well, I'm glad we can do it now. Next time, maybe Mark can join us when he's feeling better." He paused, lowering his voice conspiratorially. "Did you know your mom is watching?" Mateo snuck a glance back at Caitlin and waved sheepishly. She waved in return but stayed put, letting them have space. The breeze rustled her hair, and she offered a faint, almost wistful smile. They went through the second hole. This time Mateo insisted on going first, and to Anton's delight he managed a hole-in-one, the windmill blades narrowly missing the ball. The boy jumped with pure joy. "Yes! Did you see that?" Anton let out an excited cheer. "Awesome shot! You've got some serious talent, my friend." Mateo glowed under the praise. His eyes darted around as if remembering something. Then he asked quietly, "Were you good at sports when you were a kid?" The question caught Anton off guard. "I tried a little bit of everything," he admitted. "Baseball, soccer. I was never the best, but I had fun. My parents pushed me more toward academics than sports. They wanted me to focus on business stuff." Mateo mulled that over, tapping his putter on the ground. "We have a soccer field behind our school. Me and Mark play sometimes. He's actually better at kicking the ball than me." Anton felt a pang of longing. He wanted to see Mark dribble a ball, watch them both dash across a field. Instead, he'd been finalizing deals in Hong Kong, London, and New York, oblivious to their existence. That's great. Maybe one day I can watch you guys play," he ventured, keeping his tone hopeful but not pushy. Mateo shrugged, as if unsure how to respond. "Maybe." They progressed through more holes, chatting about silly things, Mateo's favorite cartoons, the best pizza toppings, whether or not sharks might swim near the cruise ship. At times, Anton struggled to find the right balance between showing genuine interest and not overwhelming the boy. But each smile or burst of laughter from Mateo felt like a treasure, a tiny crack in the wall between them. Once they hit the final hole, featuring a small pirate ship prop, Anton sensed movement at the periphery of his vision. Someone stood by the railing a few decks above, possibly holding a camera. He tensed. For a moment, adrenaline spiked, worried that paparazzi had found them again. But the figure disappeared as quickly as it came. No camera flashes. Perhaps just another curious passenger. Still, his guard stayed up. Mateo, oblivious to Anton's tension, squatted by the final hole, peering at the tricky tunnel beneath the pirate ship decoration. This one looks hard. The ball has to go through there and come out the other side. Anton cleared his throat, forcing a light tone. Give it a shot. Steady swing. Mateo lined up the putter, eyes narrowed in concentration. He swung. The ball zipped forward, too fast, and bounced off the ship's side, rolling away. "Aw, man," he groaned. Anton chuckled. "Second try, buddy. You got this." But before Mateo could take another shot, footsteps approached. Caitlin came over, arms folded gently, her expression a mixture of relief and caution. "Hey, how's it going?" she asked. Mateo tilted his head back. "I'm on the last hole. It's super tough, but we had fun." She glanced at Anton. "Any trouble? Any onlookers?" He shook his head, though he didn't mention the figure he'd spotted on the upper deck. "So far, so good. We'll stay vigilant." Caitlin exhaled softly, relief flickering. "Well, I'm glad you had some time together." Mateo grinned, then swung again. This time, the ball threaded through the small tunnel and emerged on the other side, rolling precariously close to the hole. His eyes widened. "Go in, go in, go in." It slowed to a stop just shy of the cup. "Oh, almost," Caitlin teased softly, stepping closer. "Tap it in, kiddo." He did, and the ball sank with a satisfying plop. "I did it!" he cried, raising both arms. "Dad, Anton, did you see?" The word "dad" slipped out so naturally that Mateo froze, cheeks flushing red. Caitlin stiffened. Anton's chest constricted. He forced a gentle nod, voice as soft as possible. "I saw. Good job." An awkward hush fell over them. For a moment, Mateo stared at Anton with wide eyes, as if unsure whether he'd violated some unspoken rule. Caitlin cleared her throat, glancing at Anton's face. He offered a small, reassuring smile to Mateo. If he felt a surge of emotion, he tried to keep it from overwhelming the boy. "It's okay," he said quietly. "I'm not upset if you—" He paused, choosing his words carefully. "I mean, if you want to call me Dad, I'm honored." Mateo quickly looked to Caitlin for permission. She didn't immediately respond, her eyes reflecting an inner storm of protective instinct and cautious acceptance. Finally, she put a hand on Mateo's shoulder. "Whatever you're comfortable with," she managed to say. "No pressure, all right?" Mateo nodded, looking relieved. "Cool." Then he turned back to Anton, a shy grin on his face. "Thanks for teaching me golf. It was fun." Anton's heart felt close to bursting. "You're very welcome, champ." At that, Caitlin cleared her throat again, glancing around. "We should head back soon. Check on Mark, unless you two want to see something else on the top deck before—" A sudden commotion near the entrance to the mini-golf area interrupted her. Two figures strode in, cameras slung around their necks, scanning the course. Anton recognized one as the man who'd snapped photos earlier this morning, wearing a smug expression. The other, a woman with a press pass, followed closely. Both turned their lenses toward the small group. Caitlin's face went pale with anger. "Oh no," she murmured. "Not again." Anton immediately positioned himself between them and Mateo. "Let's go," he said firmly, guiding the boy toward Caitlin. "Stay behind me." But the paparazzi advanced, camera shutters clicking. "Mr. Reyes, can you confirm these are your kids? Word is you're acknowledging them now. Any truth to that?" Mateo recoiled, clutching his putter in confusion. Caitlin took his hand, drawing him away from the cameras. Anton's jaw tightened. He wanted to shout, to shield them, but also to avoid giving these opportunists the angry soundbite they craved. Please respect our privacy, Anton hissed, voice trembling with suppressed rage. You're harassing a minor. Leave us alone. The photographer shrugged with a smug grin. Just doing our job, Mr. Reyes. The woman with him snapped a few more pictures in quick succession. The public has a right to know about your secret family. Caitlin, eyes aflame, grabbed Mateo's hand. We're done here, she spat, pulling him toward the exit on the opposite side of the course. Anton, I'll handle them, he said through gritted teeth, turning to block the paparazzi. The last thing he saw as he faced them was Caitlin and Mateo slipping out, fear and outrage on both their faces. The camera flashes popped. Adrenaline surged through Anton, but he knew losing his temper publicly would only fuel the gossip headlines. Instead, he called on every ounce of corporate composure he possessed, even as his muscles tensed, ready to snatch the cameras away. Stop it, he demanded, voice low and steely. You're intruding on a private moment with a child. This is unethical. One of them scoffed. Ethics? In the tabloids? Come on. He kept snapping pictures, ignoring Anton's glare. Anton inched forward. Don't make me call security. The photographer stepped back slightly, but the camera kept clicking. Whatever, we've got what we need, the man said, exchanging a triumphant glance with his colleague. They pivoted and hurried out, presumably to chase after Caitlin and Mateo. Anton instantly whipped out his phone. His voice was ice when he spoke into it. Security? This is Anton Reyes. We have paparazzi harassing children on the top deck. I need immediate assistance. Mini golf area. They're heading toward the starboard exit. He ended the call, heart hammering. But he knew it might be too late. They'd already snapped countless shots of Mateo, possibly capturing the boy calling him Dad, capturing Caitlin's stricken expression. Rage and heartbreak warred inside him. He dashed toward the corridor where Caitlin had fled, anxious to ensure they were safe. When he found them, security guards had just reached the scene, corralling the photographers as best they could, demanding to see their press passes. Caitlin stood by the elevator with Mateo, both shaken. Anton rushed over. You okay? He asked, voice taut. Did they? She shook her head, tears brimming with anger. They got pictures, Anton, of him, of all of us. Mateo clung to her, eyes wide. Why do they want pictures of me? He asked, voice cracking. I was just playing golf. Anton's throat constricted. He crouched beside Mateo, speaking softly. I'm so sorry. They think there's a story here. But you're not a story, you're a person, and they have no right to bother you. Mateo sniffed, tears threatening. Caitlin placed a protective arm around him, leveling Anton with an anguished stare. I told you, if this gets out of control, I'm gone. I know, he whispered. I'll stop them, I promise. The photographers, meanwhile, were shouting at security, insisting they had every right to photograph celebrities in public spaces. Anton heard a snippet. He practically admitted it. Did you see the kid call him Dad? Caitlin squeezed her eyes shut, a tear sliding down her cheek. This is exactly what I feared. My boys, they don't deserve this circus. Anton stood, a fierce resolution in his gaze. I'll talk to the captain if I have to. I'll get them off this ship or locked in a cabin. Something. You won't have to run. But Caitlin's expression was grim. We're going to see how Mark's doing. Then we'll decide. She steered Mateo into the elevator, ignoring the paparazzi's continuing shouts behind them. Anton watched the doors close, leaving him stranded in the corridor, rage coiling tight in his chest. A part of him wanted to tear after the photographers, to destroy every camera, every memory card. But what then? A brawl, endless headlines, and Caitlin fleeing at the next port. The unstoppable CEO in him knew brute force was a losing strategy in the court of public opinion. Instead, he forced himself to dial Danielle's number again, stepping away from the scuffle for some calm space. When she picked up, his voice trembled with urgency. Danielle, it's worse. They ambushed me and the kid at mini-golf. I need an immediate cease and desist or an injunction, whatever it takes to get these parasites off the ship. I'll pay any amount." He paused, fighting the quake in his voice. "They're terrorizing a 7-year-old, for God's sake." On the other end, Danielle's voice was grim. "We're working every angle, but you might need to make a proactive statement, confirm your paternity, or else they'll spin it with zero input from you." Anton closed his eyes, a headache pulsing. That was the last thing Caitlin wanted, going public. But if total denial led the tabloids to run wild with speculation, maybe it would be worse. There was no perfect solution. "Just keep trying, Danielle," he muttered. "I need some time to figure out how to handle this." He ended the call, heart pounding. As the security guards escorted the photographers away, Anton glanced at their smug faces and the cameras strapped around their necks. The damage was done. Those images existed. It was only a matter of time before the world saw them. Shoulders slumped, he turned away, heading back inside. He prayed that Mark wasn't panicking too, that Caitlin wouldn't pack their bags immediately. This was supposed to be a moment of bonding with his son, and it had transformed into a public ambush. The unstoppable CEO realized with a sinking feeling, for once, all the business savvy in the world might not be enough to fix what he'd set in motion. Only raw perseverance, humility, and genuine care could carry him forward now. And if the price of redemption meant facing the tabloids with honesty, he might just have to accept it. Anton drifted through the ship's opulent corridor, the steady hum of engines beneath his feet a reminder of just how isolated they were. The once gleaming surroundings now felt suffocating, every polished rail and ornate sconce reflecting his own tense expression. He cradled his phone in one hand, eyes flicking to the display as though willing it to ring with good news. But Danielle had provided no more updates since the fiasco at mini-golf. He couldn't stop thinking about Mateo's tearful question. "Why do they want pictures of me?" Every time that echo reached him, he felt his anger spike. He wanted to shield the boy from this ruthless publicity war, to make the tabloids vanish. But how? The unstoppable CEO was discovering that paparazzi didn't bow to corporate might. At last, he reached the corridor leading to Caitlin's cabin, number 510, the door that had started it all. He hesitated outside, recalling how he'd barged in days earlier and upended their lives. What if Mark's fever had worsened? What if Caitlin had decided to flee at the next port, leaving him behind again? The thought churned his stomach. Summoning courage, he raised his hand and knocked gently. A muffled sound within, movement, footsteps. Then Caitlin cracked the door open. Her face was drawn with fatigue and worry, a tumult of emotions behind her guarded gaze. She stepped out into the hallway, closing the door behind her so as not to disturb Mark. "What is it?" she asked quietly, her tone neither welcoming nor openly hostile, just cautious. He swallowed. "I came to see if you're all right, if the boys are okay, after what happened." She eyed him, assessing. "Mateo's in there with Mark, trying to cheer him up. The doctor from the ship's infirmary came by earlier to check Mark's ear. He gave us stronger medication to reduce swelling. No major alarm, but he told us to keep him rested." Relief threaded through Anton. "That's good," he breathed. "Thank you for telling me." He lingered, unsure whether to address the real reason for his visit. Finally, he cleared his throat. "Look, Caitlin, about the photographers." She stiffened. "Yes?" His voice lowered. "Danielle's trying every legal route, but they might still publish the photos soon. If that happens, there will be a media explosion. And I don't want you or the twins caught in it unprepared." She folded her arms, grim resignation on her features. "What are you suggesting?" "An official statement," Anton said, forcing calm into his tone. "It doesn't have to reveal details, but if I at least confirm that I have a relationship with the twins, my children, and ask for privacy, maybe it undermines the tabloid's secret scandal angle. Denying it outright would only make them dig deeper." Caitlin closed her eyes briefly, pain etching her face. You know I never wanted them paraded around in the media. The moment you say anything, you're giving them reason to hound us more. He nodded, tension rippling under his skin. I understand. But if I say nothing, then they create the narrative. I've seen it happen. The tabloids will spin lies, insinuations, turn it into something far worse. At least if I confirm it on my own terms, I can appeal to their conscience regarding minors. She gave a hollow laugh. As if the tabloid press has a conscience. Maybe not, he conceded, but it can sway public opinion. Some outlets might back off out of fear of backlash for harassing the kids, especially if there's a sympathetic narrative. CEO pleads for privacy of his newly discovered children. It's not foolproof, but it could give us some breathing room. Caitlin set her jaw. She stepped away from the door, gesturing for Anton to follow her a few steps further down the corridor so they wouldn't wake the boys. Her whisper took on a frustrated edge. You put me in an impossible position. If I stay quiet, we become a tabloid punching bag. If we speak up, we become a spectacle. Either way, my kids' lives get turned upside down. I know, he said, voice trembling with regret. And I'm sorry. But I'd rather attempt some form of control than let them run wild. She pressed her lips together, fighting back a surge of emotion. In that moment, Anton sensed the depth of her exhaustion. Years of single parenthood, the shock of his reappearance, the fear of losing everything she'd built. He longed to comfort her, but he kept his distance. Do what you must, she finally muttered. Just keep me informed. And don't drag the boys into an on-camera interview or something. If you want to reveal yourself as their father, fine. But protect them. A swirl of emotions rose in his chest. Relief, determination, guilt. I promise. I'll leave them out of the public eye as much as possible. She nodded, hugging her arms. I need to get back to them. Mark might wake up soon. Then her eyes flicked toward the cabin door. If you want, tomorrow, once Mark's feeling better, maybe we can have breakfast again, somewhere quieter this time. His heart soared at the small olive branch. Of course, just let me know where. Without another word, Caitlin slipped back into the cabin, shutting the door softly. Anton stood there, exhaling a shaky breath. For all the chaos and heartbreak, she was still letting him inch closer. That was all he could ask for right now. Back in his own suite, Anton wasted no time drafting a statement. He typed it on his laptop, carefully weighing each word. I, Anton Reyes, respectfully request privacy for myself and my family. Recent photos taken on board this cruise depict me with my children, who are minors. For their sake, I ask media outlets to refrain from publishing unauthorized images that may violate their rights and well-being. I confirm I am their father and accept my responsibilities. We appreciate the public's understanding and sensitivity during this time. He paused, rereading the lines. Was it too formal? Too stiff? Would it feel cold to Caitlin? Or might it convey the sincerity and protective stance he wanted? He scrolled through it again, adding a gentle note. My children did not ask for this publicity, and I implore everyone to grant them the normalcy and peace they deserve as they adjust to new family circumstances. Yes, that was better. He forwarded the text to Danielle with instructions. Publish this as a press release within the hour if negotiations fail. Make sure it's circulated to mainstream media and tabloids alike. Within minutes, Danielle replied, Understood. We'll hold it until the last possible moment. Still trying to bury the photos, but if the paparazzo goes live, we'll release your statement immediately. Anton sank back into his chair, drained. Part of him prayed Danielle would succeed in stifling the story altogether, giving him more time to mend fences with Caitlin and bond with the twins. Another part braced for the likely tsunami. If the paparazzo had pictures of Matteo smiling at him on the golf course, or the moment he'd called him Dad, it would be catnip for tabloid headlines. He glanced at the clock. Well past 5 in the evening. The sun was sinking, bathing the deck outside in an orange glow. Instead of heading out for the usual networking events, Anton stayed in, not wanting to risk more run-ins with the press. He ordered a simple room service meal, the kind he'd normally find too bland. Pushing the food around his plate, he realized how seldom he'd sat still in recent years. He'd always thrived in the swirl of power lunches and investor calls. Now, none of that mattered. All that mattered was whether Mark's fever would subside and whether Matteo would trust him enough to say "Dad" again without flinching. A soft knock at his door startled him from his thoughts. For an instant, hope flared. Was it Caitlin? But when he opened up, the visitor was a different kind of surprise. The cruise captain himself, dressed in full uniform, along with Bronny, the security staffer who'd visited earlier. "Captain Alvarez," the older man introduced himself, hand extended. "Apologies for the intrusion. May we come in for a brief moment?" Anton nodded, stepping aside. The captain's firm posture and polite tone suggested he was used to dealing with high-profile guests. Bronny hovered nearby, his expression carefully neutral. "I understand there's been trouble with photographers," Captain Alvarez began as he settled into a chair. "The staff informs me you've been harassed repeatedly, and that this involves minors." Anton sighed, pouring a glass of water for the captain. "Yes, my children. They're not used to this level of intrusion. I was hoping the ship's security could intervene more aggressively." Captain Alvarez's features softened with sympathy. "Believe me, we want all our passengers to enjoy a peaceful journey. However, we can only do so much. We can't confiscate cameras unless they violate explicit privacy zones like cabins or restrooms. The open decks are considered public." Anton's frustration flared. "But these are children. There must be a line somewhere." Bronny cleared his throat. "We can increase our watch around areas where your family frequents. We'll assign discreet staff to discourage close-up photography, and if the paparazzi cross certain boundaries, we'll have grounds to detain them. But we can't remove them from the ship without a clear breach of rules." The captain spread his hands. "We do have the authority to disembark a passenger at the next port for disruptive behavior, but that's a legal risk unless we have solid justification. If you can provide us with evidence they're actively endangering your children or violating maritime regulations, we'll take action." Evidence. So far, it was just relentless snapping of pictures, vile but arguably lawful. Anton rubbed his forehead, trying to quell his anger. "I see. Thank you for explaining. I'll see if my lawyers can supply something tangible." Captain Alvarez offered a respectful nod. "I regret the difficulties, Mr. Reyes. Let's try to manage it discreetly. My staff will coordinate with your PR or legal teams, and if you're concerned for your children's safety, we can assign a plainclothes security officer to shadow them discreetly." "That might help," Anton conceded. "But I have to ask Caitlin first. She's the mother, and I don't want her feeling we're suffocating them." "Of course," Bronny said. "We'll be on standby. Just let us know if you want extra coverage." After a final exchange of polite assurances, the captain and Bronny departed, leaving Anton alone with the swirl of thoughts. He appreciated their willingness to cooperate, but the solution felt fragile at best. If the paparazzi had no direct violation, they could stay on board, and there were days left until the ship's final destination. He sank back onto the sofa, rereading the draft statement on his laptop. The phrase, "I confirm I am their father," leaped out again. Admitting so publicly, for the entire world to see, felt monumental, like standing on a cliff's edge, about to jump. But if it eased Caitlin's anxiety even a little, if it kept cameras out of Matteo's face, it might be worth it. His phone chimed, and his heart kicked. Another text from Caitlin. "Caitlin, ship's messaging. Mark's fever broke. He's feeling a bit better. We might take him for fresh air tomorrow. I'll let you know if you can join. Matteo asked about you again. He wants to see the arcade next time." Anton exhaled a long breath of relief, a small smile curving his lips. Matteo wanted more time together, and Mark was improving. Maybe all wasn't lost. Typing quickly, he responded, "Anton, that's great news. Please let Mark know I'm rooting for him. And I'd love to see the arcade with Mateo whenever he's ready." He hesitated, considering whether to reveal he was about to release a statement. But that was a conversation better done face to face. For now, he kept it short. "Anton, sleep well. I'm here if you need anything." With that, he set the phone aside, eyes lifting to the window. Night had almost fallen, the ocean a dark expanse speckled with moonlight. The unstoppable CEO was used to controlling every variable in his life: board decisions, market expansions, multi-million-dollar negotiations. Yet in this crisis, control felt illusory. He was tethered by fragile trust from Caitlin, the well-being of two small boys, and the unrelenting gaze of a tabloid-hungry world. Still, amidst the chaos, there was a glimmer of hope. The text from Caitlin, the prospect of a next step with Mateo, and the knowledge that Mark was starting to heal. As he stood and crossed to the balcony, leaning against the rail to watch the moonlit waves, Anton felt a stirring in his chest. He was ready to face whatever came next, even a public admission, if it gave them a chance at a real future as a family. Because for the first time in years, ambition wasn't driving him. Love was. And if he had to be unstoppable in anything, let it be in safeguarding that fragile bond he'd only just begun to build. Morning broke softly over the ship's horizon. Thin streaks of pink and gold laced the sky, reflected in the gentle waves. Anton stood at the balcony of his suite, cup of coffee growing cold in his hand. He'd hardly slept, haunted by the memory of paparazzi flashes and the stark realization that a simple mini-golf outing with his son could become headline fodder. But a new day stirred hope. Caitlin's text from last night replayed in his mind. Mark's fever broke. He's feeling a bit better. We might take him for fresh air tomorrow. I'll let you know if you can join. The fact that she'd left that door open, even slightly, was enough to steady him. He finished dressing in casual attire, just a simple linen shirt and slacks, trying not to look too CEO. Today, he wanted to be more like a father than a business mogul. The phone on the desk chimed, a message from Danielle, his PR lead. "Danielle, the photographer is threatening to release everything by this afternoon if we don't pay. I've stalled him, but time's running short. Are you sure you won't negotiate further?" Anton grimaced, recalling the man's smug face at the mini-golf course. Negotiating with that kind of extortion felt like pouring gasoline on the flames. He typed a response. "Anton, no, we're done giving in. Release my statement if he publishes or if it hits noon with no deal. He won't hold us hostage." He double-checked the text of his drafted press release, waiting in Danielle's inbox. Once she clicked send, the entire world would know. His stomach knotted, but he saw no alternative. This was about owning the truth rather than letting a scandal define it. Moments later, another message popped up, this time from Caitlin. "Caitlin, ship's messaging. Morning. Mark slept well. He wants to go up to the deck for some air around 10 a.m. Mateo mentioned the arcade too. You can come, but only if we can keep it low-key." Anton let out a breath of relief. A chance to see them again, to carefully build on what little trust he'd earned. He typed a quick reply. "Anton, I'd love that. I'll meet you near the forward observation deck around 10. Thank you." Pocketing the phone, he tossed back the last of his lukewarm coffee, then left the suite, mind racing with scenarios of how to avoid paparazzi, how to help Mark if his energy flagged, how to give Mateo a bit of carefree fun. Each of those normal dad concerns felt both exhilarating and terrifying, given everything that hovered over them. By 9:50, Anton was pacing near the front elevators on Deck 12, occasionally peering at passing faces. A few passengers recognized him and began whispering, but no one approached with cameras yet. He spotted Bronny, the discreet security staffer, standing a short distance away pretending to check a map. Clearly the cruise was stepping up protective measures. Finally, the elevator doors slid open, and Caitlin appeared with both boys. She dressed them in simple t-shirts and shorts, each with a baseball cap, probably to obscure their faces a bit. Mark still looked a bit wan, but he clutched a small water bottle and gave Anton a polite smile. Mateo, by contrast, beamed at him, although a flicker of caution lingered in his eyes. "Hey," Caitlin greeted in a soft voice. "We thought some fresh air might help Mark, and maybe a short stroll around. Then Mateo wants the arcade." Anton nodded. "Great. How are you feeling, Mark?" He kept his tone quiet, mindful of the small crowd drifting by. The boy shrugged. "Ear still hurts a little, but better. The doctor said no pool yet." Mateo piped up. "He has to rest, but he said maybe we can do something calm, like the arcade race cars." Caitlin gave a half smile. "Yes, something calm. No big crowds." She glanced at Anton, lowering her voice. "Any paparazzi sightings?" "Not yet," he murmured. "I've asked security to be on standby. We'll keep this quick, just in case." She nodded, and they headed forward, passing through glass doors that led to an open walkway overlooking the bow. A gentle breeze ruffled their hair. The sky was brilliant, the ocean stretching in glimmering azure arcs. For a moment they walked in silence, simply letting Mark breathe the fresh air and Mateo take in the view. Anton trailed slightly behind, noticing how Caitlin hovered protectively near Mark, who gripped the railing. "That should have been me," he thought, a pang of regret hitting him. "I should have been here all along." Still, he forced those thoughts down. The present moment was all he had to prove himself worthy of their trust. Mateo leaned over the railing, squinting at the horizon. "All I see is water. Does it ever end?" Anton chuckled softly. "Eventually we'll reach land, but for now, it's just the open ocean. Kind of peaceful, right?" "Yeah," Mateo said, then added in a quieter tone, "Are you scared of the sea?" Anton smiled. "Not anymore. When I was younger, maybe a little. But I learned sometimes the scariest things can also be the most amazing." Caitlin shot him a quick look, as if acknowledging the deeper metaphor. He shrugged a bit. Maybe he was talking about fatherhood, too. Mark, meanwhile, stifled a small yawn. Anton immediately moved closer. "Hey, bud, need a break? We can find a seat." "Nah, I'm okay," Mark mumbled. But his eyes drooped with the lingering after-effects of fever. Caitlin gently patted his back. They found a quiet bench under an awning and sat for a few minutes, the boys sipping juice. Anton deliberately avoided pulling out his phone for emails, resisting every corporate reflex. Instead, he focused on the subtle ways Mark blinked as if fighting fatigue and on Mateo's restless energy. Caitlin glanced around, scanning the deck. "So far, so good," she said softly. He nodded. "Let's keep moving. The arcade's just on the other side, right?" He'd memorized the ship's map, determined not to flounder. Mark gave a small nod, so they rose, walking in loose formation, Caitlin and Mark side by side, with Mateo bounding ahead, Anton behind them all. The arcade on Deck 12 was a compact room filled with flashing lights and digital beeps. Clusters of racing game consoles stood on one side, while claw machines and a couple of retro pinball tables occupied the other. It was emptier than usual for a cruise day, probably because most families were out on port excursions or at the pool. Perfect for their purpose. Mateo's eyes lit up. "Yes, it's empty. Come on, Mark." He tugged his brother forward, leading him to a pair of colorful racing simulators. Mark followed, slower but with a ghost of a smile. Caitlin hovered by the entrance. Anton approached quietly, hands in his pockets. "I can keep an eye on them if you need a break," he offered. She exhaled. "I'm okay, just on alert, I guess." He nodded, understanding her wariness. "I'll watch them," he said softly, then stepped toward the racing consoles where Mateo was already seated, fiddling with the controls. Mark climbed onto the adjacent seat, still looking a bit tired but willing to try. Anton swiped the onboard arcade card, activating both games. "All right, you two, buckle up. Ready, set, go." The screens burst into color. Mateo leaned forward with glee, steering wildly through cartoonish tracks. Mark giggled at the silly sound effects. For a few precious minutes, they looked like ordinary siblings, lost in play. Behind them, Caitlin's watchful gaze softened fractionally. Anton felt a surge of gratitude. This was all he wanted, to see them happy, safe, free from cameras. But midway through the race, the door to the arcade slid open. Anton stiffened, turning slightly. A man in a baseball cap walked in, phone in hand. A woman trailed behind, glancing around with a certain alertness that spelled tabloid reporter. Cameras? Anton's pulse thudded. The pair scanned the arcade, spotting the twins at the racing games. Immediately, the woman raised her phone. Anton moved swiftly, blocking her line of sight. "Stop," he said under his breath. Caitlin came closer, tension etched on her face. The woman hesitated, phone poised. The man with her whispered something, and they circled, trying to get a clearer angle. Caitlin looked around, lips pressed tight. "I'll take the boys out the back door," she murmured to Anton. "You do something." He nodded, stepping forward to intercept the intruders. As Caitlin carefully tapped Mateo's shoulder, telling him to pause the game, Anton confronted the strangers. "Unless you work for the cruise, you shouldn't be filming here. These are minors," he warned, voice low. The woman smirked. "We're guests, just like you. Public area, isn't it?" She lifted her phone to snap a shot over Anton's shoulder. He shifted to block her again. Behind him, Caitlin ushered the boys toward a side exit. Mateo protested, "But I'm winning!" She hushed him, pressing a comforting hand on Mark's shoulder. The man in the baseball cap tried to slip around Anton, camera phone at the ready. Anton saw a flash of movement. He reached out, not to grab the phone, but to impede the man's progress. "Back off," he growled. A quick scuffle ensued, Anton sidestepping to keep the paparazzi from filming the twins' retreat. The man grumbled, snapping random shots that mostly captured Anton's torso. "Cease this, or I'll call security," Anton warned again, adrenaline surging. Then a familiar voice barked from behind, "Is there a problem here?" Bronny, the security officer, emerged along with another guard. They positioned themselves strategically between the paparazzi and the door where Caitlin had just slipped out with the boys. The woman clicked her tongue, stashing her phone away. "We were just playing arcade games, same as anyone. No rule against cameras last I checked." Bronny's expression was firm. "We have reason to believe you're harassing these passengers, including minors. Please vacate this area immediately, or risk being escorted off at the next port." A tense beat followed. The man in the baseball cap huffed, "You guys have no right." But the second guard moved in. "We do. Now, if you please." Realizing they were outnumbered, the paparazzi backed away, muttering complaints. Anton glared as they left, heart hammering. When Bronny turned to him, he managed a tight nod. "Thank you." "Just doing my job," Bronny said quietly. "Where'd Ms. Moore and the children go?" Anton inhaled. "They slipped out the side exit. I'll go find them." With a curt gesture of gratitude, Anton hurried out. The corridor was empty. He jogged around a corner, scanning for any sign of Caitlin. At last, he spotted her down a service hallway, consoling a bewildered Mateo and a pale Mark. Both boys clung to her, looking rattled. Anton approached softly, regret churning. "I'm so sorry." Mateo, tears in his eyes, hissed, "Why do they keep chasing us? I just wanted to play." Mark leaned against Caitlin, trembling. She stroked his hair. "It's okay," she murmured, though her own voice shook. Anton knelt beside them, hands raised in a calming gesture. "This isn't fair. I know. We'll figure it out." But Caitlin's eyes blazed. "I think we're done. I can't—" Her voice caught. "I can't keep exposing them to this." A pang of dread struck Anton's heart. "Caitlin, please." She blinked back tears, then looked down at Mark, whose face was drained of color. "Mark can't take this stress. He's still recovering. And Mateo's upset. We have 2 more days until the next port, right? I want to disembark there." Anton's throat tightened. "You're leaving the cruise?" She nodded, jaw set. "I have to. I told you from the start, if this got out of hand, I won't let them be hunted down like some celebrity scandal." Mateo trembled. "But I like spending time with—" He shot a hesitant glance at Anton, then quickly looked away. Caitlin squeezed his shoulder. "We'll figure something out after we get home, but for now we need to be safe, away from cameras. That's final." Anton's mind reeled. He couldn't blame her, yet panic coursed through him. If she left, would he lose his chance at fatherhood again? Could he follow them, or would that just escalate the media frenzy? At last, he drew a shaky breath. "If that's what it takes to protect them, then do it," he whispered, forcing himself to accept her choice. I'll respect your decision, but please let me help. I can arrange a private transport off the ship or accompany you discreetly, or—" She shook her head, eyes wet. "We need space. I need time to think. After we're off this floating chaos, maybe we can talk about the future, but right now, the kids come first." Anton felt his chest constrict, the finality in her tone undeniable. He nodded, voice almost failing. "All right," he managed. "Whatever's best for them." The corridor fell silent except for the distant hum of the ship's engines. Mark sniffed, leaning into Caitlin, and Mateo wiped his eyes, looking torn between fear and disappointment. Anton hovered, wishing he could do more than offer hollow reassurances. Gently, Caitlin guided the boys toward the nearest elevator. "Come on, let's get you both back. Pack up slowly so we're ready at the next port. I'll talk to the purser's desk about disembarking." Mateo lagged a step behind, turning for a moment to face Anton. He mouthed a single word. "Bye." Then he hurried to catch up with his mother and brother. Anton stood there in the empty corridor, watching them go. His entire body felt numb. The unstoppable CEO undone by a paparazzi onslaught and the heartbreak of 2 children he'd only just begun to know. A beep on his phone alerted him to a text. With trembling fingers, he checked the display. "Danielle, no further negotiations possible. Photographer plans to release images today. I'm sending out your statement now." Anton swallowed hard. So it begins. The tabloid world would have his confession in hours. And Caitlin was leaving, possibly severing his fragile bond with Mateo and Mark. The future seemed to darken. Yet, a small ember of determination sparked within him. If Caitlin left the ship, he could still fight for a real place in the twins' lives afterward, provided he didn't make any more reckless moves. He had to trust that showing them love, respect, and resolve would eventually bring them back together. His own words, typed in that statement, echoed in his mind. "We appreciate the public's understanding and sensitivity." The world might or might not grant that. Either way, he knew what he had to do: safeguard the boys as best he could, keep them from further harm, and prepare for a life where fatherhood mattered more than any corporate triumph. He closed his eyes, releasing a pent-up breath. In less than 2 days, the cruise would dock at the next port. Everything would change. If he wanted any hope of a real family, he'd have to prove himself worthy long after the cameras stopped clicking. This time, he wouldn't walk away. Even if Caitlin stepped off this boat, he'd follow wherever the path to fatherhood led. Blinking away the sting in his eyes, he turned, heading back along the corridor. He needed to stay calm, to prepare for the oncoming press storm, and to stand by in case Caitlin or the boys needed anything. Unstoppable? He hoped so, because he was about to fight the hardest battle of his life, armed only with sincerity and remorse. The day sped by in a blur. Anton barely remembered the string of phone calls from his lawyers, PR advisors, and even a handful of corporate partners who'd seen the breaking headlines. Every conversation felt like wading through quicksand. He kept repeating the same lines. "Please respect my children's privacy. No comment beyond the official statement, and we will pursue legal action if minors are harassed." The tabloids hadn't published every photo yet, but leaked snippets were swirling online, fueling speculation about his secret family. He ended up barricading himself in his suite, scanning an endless stream of social media chatter with a mix of dread and frustration. Some voices were surprisingly supportive, urging the press to leave the children alone. Others mocked him as a heartless CEO who abandoned his family. It was a maelstrom he'd never experienced. All his corporate crises paled in comparison to this personal firestorm. At last, night fell again. A restless hush settled over the ship's corridors. Anton emerged to find them quieter than usual. Perhaps the passengers were exhausted from the drama, or off in late-night shows. The next port was hours away, and somewhere on this vast liner, Caitlin and the twins were preparing to leave. He hadn't heard from her since the incident in the arcade. No messages, no calls. She was probably avoiding him for fear of causing more scenes. He couldn't blame her. Still, he needed one last conversation, if she'd allow it. A chance to reaffirm he wasn't giving up. So he took the elevator to Deck 5, intending to check with the purser's desk on any special arrangements for tomorrow's port. If Caitlin was planning a quiet disembarkation, he wanted to ensure no paparazzi ambush. When he arrived, the small lobby was nearly empty, only a lone staffer flipping through some paperwork behind the counter. Anton approached and gently inquired whether Ms. Moore had arranged an early departure. The staffer nodded, consulting a computer screen, then confirmed that she had indeed requested assistance disembarking as soon as the ship docked. They'd scheduled a private transfer van to whisk her to the airport. A hollow ache settled in Anton's stomach. So it was real. She was leaving. He thanked the staffer and turned away, shoulders heavy. Would Caitlin vanish into the airport throng, leaving him with just a swirl of tabloid headlines and regret? Could he convince her to let him be part of their new life, if not on the cruise, then later, when the dust settled? One thought guided him. Even if she pushed him away now, he would still follow, gently, persistently, until the boys knew they had a father who cared. As he stepped into the corridor, he caught sight of a figure leaning against the wall, half hidden by a potted plant. Heart lurching, he recognized Caitlin. She must have overheard him talking to the staff. Their eyes met, a silent current of tension passing between them. She looked exhausted, her hair pulled back in a messy ponytail, face pale under the corridor's muted lighting. Yet her posture was firm, as though she'd braced herself for this conversation. "Caitlin," he said, voice soft. "You're up late." She pushed off the wall, nodding curtly. "I was finalizing details with the purser. Thought I heard your voice." She shifted, arms folded protectively. "You know about tomorrow, I assume." He swallowed. "Yes. You're leaving at dawn." She exhaled, gaze drifting to the polished floor. "I wish things had been different. I hate that it's come to this, running away from cameras. But I can't risk my kids' well-being for the sake of anything else." Her voice cracked on the last words. Anton approached, but he left a respectful distance between them. "I understand, and I'm not asking you to stay on the cruise, but I need you to know I'm not walking away from the twins. I have to be in their lives, Caitlin. Somehow." She pressed her lips together, tears glinting in her eyes. "I was angry at you for so long, part of me still is. But I also see how you're trying. Mateo's face lights up when he talks about golf with you. Mark, well, he's more reserved, but he's asked if you'll come visit us someday. I just worry about the headlines about stirring up more chaos in our hometown." Anton's heart seized at the mention of Mark asking for him. He took a careful step closer. "We'll deal with it together. You don't have to do this alone anymore." She nodded, a single tear escaping down her cheek. "I know, but this has to be on my terms. I can't have paparazzi camped on my doorstep or your PR team spinning happy family stories. I need to protect them first." "Agreed," he said, voice hushed. "I'll do whatever it takes. Cancel all my public appearances if I have to. Arrange private visits. anything to shield them. She wiped the tear away, inhaling shakily. Let me see how Mark and Mateo cope once we're home. If it's safe, if the story dies down, I'll call you. Maybe you can come see us. Slowly, one step at a time. No big show. Anton's throat tightened with gratitude. I'd like that. A lot. Then he ventured, May I at least come to the gangway tomorrow? Help ensure no cameras ambush you as you leave? She hesitated, visibly torn. Finally, she nodded. All right. But keep your distance until I'm sure it's clear. Then maybe say goodbye to the boys. His eyes stung. Thank you. Truly. She leaned against the wall again, gaze dropping. And about those pictures in the press. I guess it's done. Everyone knows now. Anton nodded, recalling how Danielle had told him the photographer sold the story hours ago. I released a statement confirming it. Some outlets have been surprisingly empathetic, while others, not so much. But I insisted on protecting the kids. Thanks, she whispered. For a moment, neither spoke, just breathing the shared air, acknowledging the strange mix of heartbreak and hope that bound them. At length, Caitlin pushed off again, shoulders squared. I should go check on them. We have an early morning. He nodded. Of course. I'll be there at the gangway just to help with security. Then I'll respect your space until you're ready. A final flicker of emotion crossed her face. Gratitude, sadness, maybe a touch of remorse. She gave a slight tilt of her head, then turned and walked away, footsteps echoing softly in the corridor. Anton stood there, watching her figure disappear around a corner, feeling the weight of the entire world on his chest. Dawn broke gray and misty, the ship nudging into the port under a cloudy sky. Deckhands scurried about, securing lines. Passengers in the know lined up by the gangway, excited for a day of onshore excursions. Among them, paparazzi lurked. Anton spotted 2 or 3 suspicious individuals near the front, cameras slung over shoulders. His pulse pounded. He hovered at a discreet distance, wearing sunglasses and a plain cap. Bronny, the security officer, was stationed nearby with 2 more guards waiting. They'd agreed to help Caitlin and the boys exit via a separate corridor, away from the main crowd. At precisely 7 a.m., Caitlin appeared with Mateo and Mark, luggage in tow. A staff member guided them down a side ramp. Anton caught their eyes from across the walkway, giving a slight nod. Caitlin inclined her head. Mateo waved timidly, and Mark managed a small smile. They looked anxious but determined, like a family ready to flee the spotlight. He waited until they were almost at the exit before slipping into position with Bronny, cutting off any photographers who tried to follow. One man raised his camera, but Bronny stepped forward. "Private corridor, sir, you need clearance." The photographer huffed and backed away. Satisfied the path was clear, Anton quickly moved to catch up with Caitlin. The twins stood near the gangway's end, behind a partition that blocked public view. They looked so small with their backpacks and wide eyes. Anton approached softly, removing his sunglasses. "Morning," he said, voice gentle. "You set to go?" "Yeah," Caitlin murmured, her gaze darting around for any sign of cameras. "Everything seems under control. Thanks for arranging the extra security." Mateo reached out, tugging on Anton's sleeve. "Are you coming with us?" he asked, half hopeful, half wary. Anton shook his head slowly. "Not now. Your mom and I decided it's best if you guys go home without more fuss. But I'll call you, okay? We'll figure out the next step once things calm down." Disappointment flickered across Mateo's features, yet he nodded. Mark, quieter, clutched a small teddy bear, a gift from the kids' club. He stared at Anton, eyes thoughtful. "Will we see you soon?" he asked in a near whisper. Anton's heart twisted. He stooped down so he was eye level with Mark. "I promise, as soon as your mom says it's safe, I'll come visit. Or maybe you'll visit me, but either way, I'm not disappearing again." Mark studied his face as though measuring those words, then gave a tiny nod. Okay. Anton placed a gentle hand on Mark's shoulder, then turned to Mateo. And next time we'll finish that arcade race properly with no interruptions. Mateo managed a small grin. Yeah, so I can beat you again? Anton laughed quietly, ruffling the boy's hair. Deal. Then he looked at Caitlin, swallowing the surge of emotion threatening to break his composure. Take care of yourself too. Let me know if there's anything at all. She gave a shaky smile. Thank you for everything you tried to do. She paused, struggling with words. I know you mean it. She reached out, surprising him, and gave his hand a brief squeeze. Then she straightened, focusing on the boys. All right, let's go. Bronny signaled it was clear. Caitlin and the twins stepped onto the gangway, descending toward the pier. Anton lingered, watching them every step of the way, heart aching with both loss and a strange sense of renewal. They weren't running from him so much as from the circus he'd inadvertently brought into their lives. But maybe, just maybe, they'd find a path back to him once the dust settled. Halfway down, Mateo glanced back, waving. Anton waved in return. Mark followed his brother's lead, lifting a shy hand. Then both boys turned forward, holding tightly to Caitlin as she guided them onto solid ground. That was it. They were gone from the ship, out of his immediate reach. The unstoppable CEO, who'd once believed he controlled his destiny, stood on the deck, feeling smaller than ever. Yet a kernel of determination glowed inside him. He had come face to face with fatherhood, stumbled through heartbreak and scandal, and still found a flicker of hope. He stayed there until their figures disappeared into the port terminal. A faint sunray broke through the clouds, illuminating the place where they'd vanished, as though offering a silent benediction. Eventually, Bronny cleared his throat. Sir, we should return to the main deck. Anton nodded absently, slipping his sunglasses on again. The cameras still lurked out there, but the story would move on soon, and he'd be ready for whatever came next. He would keep building a life that welcomed Caitlin, Mark, and Mateo. No matter the challenge, no matter how long it took. As he re-entered the ship, he felt an odd, steady resolve. The old, unstoppable drive had found a new focus. Not empire building, but family building. And as he walked, he replayed Mark's quiet voice. Will we see you soon? Yes, Anton silently vowed. They would see him soon, and this time he'd fight like hell to be worthy of the word Dad. If you enjoyed the story, don't forget to leave a like and let us know your thoughts in the comments. We read every one of your wonderful messages. They're the best reward for all our work. It's an honor to keep you company with these narratives, and we hope they bring reflection and empathy to your day. Blessings. If you enjoyed this story, don't miss the next one. Just click on the screen.